Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight, and thank you for your patience. It's Thursday, November 4th. Welcome to this meeting of the Board of Education, and it's my pleasure to make a motion for the board to return to public session. Thank you, Rory. Seconded by Liz. Thank you so much. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Terrific. And would everybody please join us, as is our custom, by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is in the rear of our library tonight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us, members of the community. It's nice to see everyone tonight. We're very much looking forward to an opportunity to revisit activity of the TriState Consortium. TriState was last here in 2018, fall of 2018, and we're thrilled that they are back in action and we're able to have an update on their visit to Katona-Lewisboro. We'll pause briefly for some board announcements, and tonight we have our board committee reports on the agenda. We're looking forward to hearing from our student board member. And in fact, Abigail, if you're ready, we would love if you would lead off. Thank you.
Over the month of October, all schools have been having fun celebrating fall and Halloween. Many events were held across the district, from donation drives to Halloween fairs. Learning is in full swing as we approach the end of Q1, and the majority of seniors are in the process of applying to college or have already done so. In Campus Congress, we last met October 27th, and this meeting was focused on creating committees, which we decided we would focus on building committee and then several school events committees, as well as physical education. And within these, we passed several proposals that we are waiting for administration to hear. Another proposal that I mentioned in my last board report is the winter pep rally, and that we are still working towards figuring out all of the details. And overall, Campus Congress has been making a lot of progress in our meetings, and we have a lot that we hope to accomplish this month. In John Jay High School, on October 27th, the National Honor Society held their annual blood drive for students and staff to donate blood for the Red Cross. NHS members could donate blood or volunteer at the drive by giving out snacks and drinks to those who donated blood, and this was very successful. Physics students are learning about the law of pendulum motion by creating pendulum waves out of ordinary items, and this was a great way to get back into hands-on learning after over a year of virtual labs and projects. Over the past month, all fall varsity sports held their senior nights, and they're at the end of their season, so winter sports will begin November 15th. And lastly, Halloween was celebrated on October 29th, with the orchestra performing in the hallway, and everybody wore their costumes. At John Jay Middle School, we had Picture Day, which was held for grades 6 through 8 on October 19th, and the middle schoolers also dressed up for Halloween on the 29th. At Meadow Pond, Soup Day was held October 8th, which was a fun opportunity for students to have soup for lunch made with the vegetables that they harvested the previous day. The Halloween Spooktacular was held in 2 sessions on Friday, October 29th, and the book fair was held this Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. At KES, students read and learned about Columbus and celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day as a part of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program. The annual KES Halloween Fair was held October 23rd. The Holiday Food Share Drive began collecting items this past Monday. And lastly, the KES book fair will begin this following week. And lastly, at Increase Miller, the Increase Miller PTO gifted a buddy bench for students. So this was placed on the playground and kids could sit on it and make friends with others, just to encourage making new friends and playing with others. And the annual Increase Miller Spooktacular was held on October 23rd, and the book fair started today and will run through November 12th.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abigail. We really appreciate your insight into all that's happening across the district at every level. Did board members have comments or questions? If you don't mind, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly when you were speaking about Campus Congress. Did you mention a building committee, as in facilities, the high school building?
Yes.
Can you say a word or two about what that is?
Yeah, just like small things around the building that we think we could like improve upon, like in the classroom environment. So like one idea was like flexible seating and stuff like that.
Wonderful. Interesting. Thank you. We look forward to hearing about that. That's great. Thank you. Okay, if there are no further comments or questions, then next up is board committee reports. This is item 7.01. I know we heard from audit recently. I'm not sure whether there's anything new to report out. Thank you. And our facilities committee has convened, and Liz has graciously agreed to chair that committee. I don't know, Liz, whether there's a word or two that you want to say at this point about the work of the committee.
So we had a meeting last night, and we continued to really look at the building condition survey from 2020, and have begun the process of really going through it with fine-tooth comb, prioritizing things. And I look forward to hearing more from Abigail about what the Campus Congress comes up with as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And parent council, has parent council met since the last meeting?
We're meeting tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you. Policy committee.
No policies are up for third read. We were looking at policy about non-resident students and how and when they could come to the district in terms of houses being sold or apartments being leased, and a few others. And we are probably going to be instituting a more vigorous inter-meeting homework plan for all members, so we could make the most of our meetings. So I just spring that on people. So public, you can't object too much.
Great, thank you. And I don't believe sustainability has met since the last board meeting, but we are scheduled to meet tomorrow morning. And then just with regard to Westchester Putnam County School Board Association, I wanted to mention that somebody who previously served as what's referred to as the Area 10, which is our area for NYSBA, the New York State School Board Association, she actually recently has become the president of NYSBA, leaving a vacancy in the Area 10 directorship. And school boards are being asked to support nominations of other board members in the region who are interested in filling that vacancy. And I just wanted to mention this tonight in anticipation that perhaps at the next board meeting, I might suggest that we adopt a resolution to nominate one or two individuals who have expressed interest in the position. It doesn't mean that we're supporting them and voting them into the directorship, but that we would support their candidacy on the ballot. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I'll try to get some more information together and let everybody know who is interested in the position. And then perhaps at the next board meeting, we would have an opportunity to help these folks get on the ballot. We have to have the nominations to the folks who coordinate this by December 6th. So the next board meeting would be our opportunity to do it. Thank you. And if there are no further committee reports, I'll just pause for board announcements before we turn our attention to our featured discussion tonight. And on behalf of several of us who were able to attend a learning walk of John Jay Middle School, I'm sure several board members would like to say a few words. Please allow me just to say thank you to members of the district office team, Andrew, Mary, for your time, and to Mr. Swiatowicz for generously spending the morning with us. It was such a pleasure to be able to spend time in the middle school, to walk through some classrooms. Thank you to teachers for opening their classrooms to us. Wonderful to see students back in the building. We really appreciate the time and coordination and the opportunity. And with that, I'll invite any other board colleagues who wish to say a few words to please do so, or if there are other board announcements, I'll just pause here.
I think the school walk was really tremendous, and I'm not sure if it was just sort of pent up longing to get back inside the schools, or if it actually was really as magical as it was. We had the opportunity to visit with many different classrooms, including the special ed classroom at the middle school. We met some of the students and all of the teachers. I was most impressed by the upgrading that we've recently done to the tech labs that were there. When my children were in the middle school, I had some experience in those labs, and they've been completely revamped. And if anybody has the opportunity to go in there, you should really take a look. They were spectacular. The enthusiasm of the teachers, as well as just the way in which they have been relaid out and reconfigured, and new technology. And the teachers actually told us they did some of the painting themselves. They came in and actually like painted the lockers. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to take a look and to understand more about how that building operates. It was a great opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just again echo our thanks, and I do think, you know, after having that be like really a consistent activity that we always do throughout the year, and to not be able to do it during COVID was hard. And so it's really nice to be able to be in the buildings, and I look forward to the learning walks in our other schools. And I just want to make one board announcement. And Abigail, this may be something that you're aware of, but I was at a Booster Club meeting earlier this week, and we did institute a female-only open fitness center session. It's something that had come up with some of the female students and female athletes, and there were 22 young women who came to work out in the fitness center on the first female-only night, and actually some staff members came as well who,
Nice.
you know, were able to come and join the students. So they're going to try to institute a minimum, I think, of 2 days a week for that, but maybe more. But it seemed that it really was very successful. So I think it's great.
Thank you. Any other board announcements? Andrew, please, we're sure you have announcements for us tonight. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Marjorie. Just a couple. I also want to echo a lot of Abigail's words. Thank you. And a lot of the fall activities that Abigail mentioned, including the book fairs and some of the Halloween events. We saw pumpkin patches at some of the elementary schools. There's a lot of support from our parents for those activities. So we want to say thank you for all of that involvement. We really, really appreciate it. It has been a very celebratory time in school, and it's really nice to see these in-person events coming back. And then on Tuesday of this week, of course, was election day, and our students were not in school. I want to thank Mary and her team, our staff developers, our building leaders, and others for leading a great deal of professional learning that was going on in the buildings here while our staff were here in school throughout that day. A very worthwhile day and very much needed. That's our last professional learning day for this year. And so now we go through to the end, and we still have other opportunities after school and faculty meetings and things like that. That's the last of the full day opportunities for that kind of work. And then the final announcement, just late this afternoon, Westchester County Department of Health reached out. I've had a few, not many, but I've had a few emails from community about vaccinations. So it's been in the news a lot, the opportunity for 5 to 11-year-olds now to be vaccinated. And the county has reached out to schools to ask if we would get a sense from our community of the level of interest in having 5 to 11-year-olds be vaccinated at school. So we will be reaching out to the community to ask about that. And I will be as clear as I can possibly be in the communication that this is not a commitment. We don't know if it will actually happen or not. The county is simply trying to gather information from around all the districts in the county to see where there might be more interest, where there might be less, so that if in fact they do have the ability to place a vaccine clinic somewhere, and again, even that's uncertain, but if they do, they would probably place it where there seems to be the greatest interest. So that's why they're asking us just to inquire. And I've had a few questions about people wondering about a mandate for the vaccine. I'm aware of no discussion of a mandate, and I'm very much aware that schools certainly are not in a position to mandate vaccinations. That has to come to us from New York State Department of Health. So as far as I'm aware, if there's to be a clinic, and again, it's very much an if, it would certainly be optional for families to choose to have their children be vaccinated in school. Just a heads up that you may see that coming, possibly as soon as tomorrow, if we can get that survey developed in time. And that's it for announcements for tonight.
Great. Thank you so much. Any questions? Alana, please.
I wanted to just on that topic of the Westchester Department of Health, I think it's really exciting that the county is trying to find the best ways to distribute vaccines to children who are now eligible to receive that. So I would encourage all parents to fill out that survey and just let us know if it was something that, you know, you'd be interested. And the question is just, would you be interested in having it at the school? And I think it's just sort of trying to understand where is the best place for students that want it, which I hope are many, to get vaccinated would kids, the idea being that it would be maybe kids are more comfortable coming into a school setting versus like the county center or some other place, or, or doctor's offices, just that it's easier to mass distribute at a larger site than at individual doctor's offices, just to get it out quicker. So I think.
And I'm sure, I thank you for saying all that, Alana. I'm sure there'll be questions the community members will have about exactly how it's going to work.
Right.
I don't know any of the answers to those questions at this point. We've just been asked to solicit what sort of interest would there be. And again, if someone's not interested, they simply don't return the survey. That's fine. We're just looking to see where there is interest.
Right. And then just to, we have run some vaccine clinics or with adjacent school
Correct.
districts, right? And those have been pretty successful.
There was a clinic last year. We did it together with Bedford. It was hosted in the Bedford school, but a number of our community did take advantage and go there.
But just to be clear, like we, meaning like
County.
the county,
Right.
like for the
Right,
county, it was a Westchester County, but it was at Fox Lane High School. So it was convenient to be able, and it was, in the afternoon and early evening. So you could, grab your kid and run to Fox Lane at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night, which was certainly quite helpful.
Mhm.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah,
And just,
yeah.
like,
But
just
I'm saying,
using,
like,
just
Westchester
using
County-
public sites to
Yes.
do public health,
Correct.
which is seems like a
Yeah.
great idea.
Great, thank you. So I think we're about to turn our attention then to 9.01, which is a discussion of TriState and where we are with respect to that visit. I'll just mention, because I know some folks have signed up for public forum, but for anybody who's with us tonight who wishes to speak but hasn't yet had an opportunity to sign up, this would be a great time. There's a laptop in the back by the circulation desk. Please feel free to sign up. And shortly after this discussion, we will turn our attention to public forum. And with that, I think we are ready to hear about TriState. I'll turn it over to
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Andrew.
So as Marjorie mentioned, TriState Consortium visited us just last week. I want to say, I imagine some of us are not familiar with what is TriState Consortium, so I want to say a little bit about that and then talk about the visits and what they do for schools. TriState started back in the early 90s with a group of superintendents from relatively high-performing districts around the tri-state area. So across New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, the superintendents came together primarily from my understanding of the history. I wasn't obviously there at the time, out of a feeling that the traditional assessments and feedback tools that these types of districts had were not felt to be serving them well in terms of trying to continue to make continual improvement in their schools. So that state assessments and some of the other standardized assessments tend to be very consistent from one year to the next in high achieving school districts, and to show very similar measures from one year to the next. And this group of superintendents came together with the idea that, are there ways that together we can form a consortium and help one another find other ways in which to push ourselves to always be improving, which was the goal of that group then and is still the goal today. By the year 2000, TriState had grown to include 48 districts in the tri-state region. And they serve the districts who are their members in a variety of different ways. One way are these visits that I'll describe in more detail in a moment. Another way, they actually have support groups for various different positions in districts. So there's a superintendent study group, there's a principal study group, an assistant principal study group, a curriculum study group. So the people from around the region, from comparably performing districts, can come together and talk about latest thinking, latest ideas, and work across district in that way. So that's one of the ways they support. They hold conferences. I think there was a conference today, actually. Because of the size of the group, they're able to bring in nationally known speakers, sometimes internationally known speakers, who come and speak to all the members of TriState. And they hold seminars and other things. So in a variety of different ways, they support districts. But one of the most fundamental ways, and the way they began, is by doing these visits. And they've done over 200 school visits in their time. They average about 13 a year. They actually, when teachers or administrators who are in the member schools feel they have an interest in participating in a visit to another district, they go through a training process to learn how the visit's going to work, to learn what they're looking for, to learn various protocols by which they'll make observations and have discussion together, and then they can become part of a visiting team. So back in the fall of 2018, which feels like a very long time ago now, we had a visit from 18 TriState Consortium colleagues. The visit lasted for 3 days. Representatives of that visit came from the Bedford School District, Trumbull, Connecticut, New Canaan, Connecticut, Scarsdale, Westport, Connecticut, Somers, along with members of, there's now a sort of an executive committee of the Tri-State Board, and they come along also. They spend 3 days in the schools, they visit classrooms, they spend time in classrooms, they interview teachers, they interview students, and they interview parents. We made a presentation back in December of 2018 about that visit to the board. So anybody's interested in, I'll summarize a little bit now, but I'm sure that presentation is also still on board docs if anybody wanted to go and look at it. And we developed with them a focus for the visit. The focus at that time was around our learning commitment, which was newer then. It's still with us today. And we wanted to ask them some key questions about our learning commitment. The questions that we asked them to consider on the visit are the following. To what degree do individual staff members believe the learning commitment is important and relevant to their work with students? How are students and parents experiencing the learning commitment? And in what ways is the learning commitment being utilized in our classrooms? So then they came, they did the visit, they spent all that time together looking and talking independent of us. So they went out on their own to gather data and think about those questions that we asked. At the end of the visit, they come back, they meet again with representatives of the district, they debrief in front of us quite extensively on a 3-day visit, and then we have an opportunity to ask them questions. So I'll share a little bit of the feedback from back in 2018. In response to that first question, to what degree do individual staff members believe the learning commitment is important and relevant to their work, they found universal awareness among the faculty of the learning commitment and widespread understanding of it. The degree to which faculty saw it as important and relevant varied. And one of the nice things about this Tri-State group is that they're very honest in their feedback with us, which is what we want, obviously. It makes for a constructive visit. They found that in the elementary schools, the learning commitment was perceived to be aligned with curriculum and in a number of places and initiatives. And at the secondary level, they found more challenge, quite honestly, in that secondary level is more content driven, more traditionally content and assessment driven. So they encountered a little bit more challenge there in terms of embracing some of the themes and ideas of our learning commitment. But across all the schools, they found a very positive, thoughtful an environment receptive to thoughtful innovation and improvement. I'm reading from some of their feedback to us. And they also found that the faculty had worked diligently to define the what and soon the how of the learning commitment, but had some question about whether people really understood the why behind it. Why is it this initiative in the schools? That'll be echoed again later. In response then, so that was the question about staff. Then we had a question about students and parents experiencing commitment. And there they found that both groups spoke very positively about the school experience. And they said of students, I think in particular, they couldn't name the learning commitment, but were able to speak about why the themes of the learning commitment, engagement, relevance, and an active environment are important and useful for moving work forward. They found that parents commended the quality of instruction across all the schools and that students spoke eloquently about engagement, making connections, collaborating, and self-confidence. And that students indicated the importance of, this is a very, very nice one to hear and think about in response to the pandemic and other themes. Students indicated the importance of having teachers who cared about them as persons and not just about the work they produce. And then in that final question, in what ways was the learning commitment being utilized in our classrooms? Again, they found utilization varied, understandably. They observed lessons that in their language contained hints of broader implication in the future. So they saw the beginnings of movement in that direction. They saw lots of examples of student-to-student interaction, considerable amount of group work, collaborative projects, the kinds of activities that can contribute to an active learning environment and that students enjoy. And then the constructive feedback there was that these things will become even more meaningful when connected more clearly to problem solving, learner choice, and authentic inquiry. And then I'm trying to move along here at a reasonable pace. They gave us a significant number of thoughts for consideration and next steps to contemplate. They suggested that we think about more concrete description of classroom activities and perhaps rubrics that would describe them more concretely for faculty. They talked about refining administrative learning walks around the learning commitment. They stressed even at that time more conversations around that question of why. Why is this so important? That comes back again recently. They talked about the evolution of instructional technology through the lens of the learning commitment, the impact of instructional spaces. That was an interesting one for us on the commitment, especially with Rory's just recent reference to the newly designed tech lab and now thinking about space there. They talked about budget for professional learning. And they also talked about our innovation cohort, which at that time was just in its first iteration. They had some suggestions for how it might be revised moving forward. So that was all back in the fall of 2018. So they return again last week. It's now a smaller team, I think largely in part due to COVID. Rather than 18, it was now 6 members from the consortium and from, again, neighboring districts. It's the same members come back to return.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of the return visit is to ask what has happened since, how helpful were some of the suggestions that we made, how helpful was the feedback, and are there any new questions that we might think about together? So of course, a lot has happened since the fall of 2018. Not all of it, much of it, things that we wouldn't have wanted to happen in schools. However, there was about a year before we were shut down by the pandemic from the time of their first visit. So we described for them some of the things that had happened in that year. We talked about some new planning and visioning for technology that had already been put into place in that year before COVID. We had newly designed technology spaces in all of our classrooms, along with devices being distributed to all teachers in that year as we were thinking about new ways to use that tech. The innovation cohort was redesigned for its second iteration prior to COVID around what we call an action research model and a requirement that all work for people who were in the innovation cohort be tied to the learning commitment. We first developed and designed a graphic description of what we think the learning commitment is in order to show to faculty. Here are our focus points. It's a circular graphic that the board has seen before and that we've used at opening days with our faculty. We'd had its first iteration in the fall of the innocent days of the fall of 2019. And that was in part our attempt to get at the why, to give us opportunities to talk about it. And we've also grew some of our external partnerships with other organizations, some existing, some new, such as Challenge Success, the organization out of Stanford that we continue to do work with today. And then of course, COVID arrived and things shifted dramatically. But we still, we spoke with the visitors last week about the impact of COVID, both the challenges and then how we tried to take advantage of some opportunities where we could. So we spoke to them about some of the professional learning that continued through and how we tried to maintain focus where we could on engagement and active learning. We talked about the asynchronous Wednesdays and their impact on professional learning. Again, we were very candid about the challenges. We also talked about now the much more accelerated rollout of technology, which they had sort of hinted at as something to be thinking about down the road. It all happened very rapidly under COVID. And then we moved towards this year. We spoke about some of the work that's happening on our superintendent's conference days that I just mentioned. We have some new teacher leadership positions that we've put into place to support some of the focus points around the learning commitment, new committees that we have in place, as well as the growth of our staff developers to numbers to support ongoing learning with staff. And some new curriculum design templates for designing units connected to the learning commitment. And then we also shared with them some of the feedback we heard from our recent learning cafe, which brought them really right up to where we had been a few weeks ago, and some of the thoughts we were hearing there from community members related to lessons to be learned from the pandemic. So they listened to us again. This visit, I should mention, is much shorter. It's not another 3-day visit. This was a morning that we get to spend. And now, of course, it was on Zoom because that's how a lot of the world is still functioning. But then they still listen to us and they give us feedback again. They were very positive in their feedback to us about the perseverance with this commitment. Again, having visited lots of districts in our region, they were impressed that we stayed with our commitment, that we continue talking to faculty and providing supports for their learning as we try to grow the level of engagement with the learning commitment. They were constructive in seeking out opportunities for more collaboration between staff and students. They still see more opportunity for that. they were quite taken by the alignment between the themes of the learning commitment and a lot of the thinking that's emerged both during and post-pandemic. A lot of the thinking around social emotional learning, more meaningful engagement for students, more focus on less, or more, I should say, more depth rather than more breadth. Again, themes that we heard in our recent learning cafe from community members. They saw a lot of overlap and were impressed again that we were kind of staying the course with these themes that have really emerged nationally and internationally now. They continued to stress communication about that question of why, and that we keep going back and trying to help people. And I think this is something they see in a lot of districts, that initiatives begin, they may go on for a while, people may lose sight of why are we doing this? What's the importance behind this? And they pushed us on thinking more about that. And they acknowledged, and they said again from other visits that they've done in the region, that there is a certain exhaustion from the pandemic and all that it has required, and that there's been as much focus on survival and getting through as there's been on innovation, and that building leaders and instructional leaders have been pulled away from work they would be typically doing to be doing COVID-related tasks that take up a great deal of time. So they were understanding of, in that context, they were encouraging and supportive of the work that's still been happening in our district around the commitment. So it was a very, again, positive visit. The nature of these visits is they give us feedback. They're constructive. They want to be supportive, and they want to push our thinking, and we appreciate that. And in return, we visit other districts, and we try to provide the same in the same lens. So we really, we thank them a lot, because they continue also to provide those study groups that I mentioned earlier. And it has been very easy through COVID to get stuck on doing nothing but COVID. It can be very all-consuming. So it continues, I think, now to be particularly important that we push ourselves to get back to the kinds of things that keep us innovating, moving forward, giving our students the experiences we want them to have. So it's important that we express our appreciation to them for their dedication and their continued work. So I hope that gives our board a sense of who TriState is and the kind of work they do. They're a really valuable and much appreciated group in our region. And they do bring together a lot of very like-minded school districts, which is helpful.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Very helpful. Thank you. We really appreciate that update. I'm glad that you had the opportunity to bring them back. Do we have a sense of whether we will continue to engage with TriState, moving forward? Do we have another round of topics? I'm thinking about this sort of in the way that we have our auditors come and then they do a risk assessment and that determines the next audit. Is there a discussion at this stage of where we would go from here?
It doesn't happen that quickly.
Okay.
Now that there are 48 districts, I said they can do about 13 visits a year. So it takes them a while to get through the cycle and be able to visit everyone. So it'll probably be a couple of years at least before they return on a different topic the next time around. So,
thank you. And will we have staff members who are participating as visiting TriState representatives, going to other school districts and participating in their site visits?
Yeah, I think we've actually had staff recently express interest in being trained by
We have a few of our administrators and staff developers have been trained. So it's nice to have that cadre of people who are involved. I also think it's worth mentioning that the process of preparing for these visits is so helpful because, especially with COVID, you become so focused on the day to day that it forced us to look back and think about, what the recommendations of that initial report were and think about what we have done, what we haven't done, why we haven't done it, what we might do better. So I think the process of reflecting on our work and then thinking about how we move forward was really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments or follow-up questions?
I guess, it sounds really useful for them to look almost like at our mission statement, at our learning commitment. And as a board, we've spent a lot of time with the learning commitment and we've evaluated whether the words were right or we needed to update it. And I remember that circular diagram with all of the inputs, and I think we added 6 or 7 of them. recently. And then for them to come back 3 years later and to give us an update on where they thought we were about that in a single day is really useful. But are there, maybe to Marjorie's point, are there other areas of running of the district other than the learning commitment where their input would be welcomed? Are there like, do they excel in just sort of learning commitments across all school districts, or do they do
they
broader
approach
analysis?
a district when it's time for a visit? They approach the district, and then collaboratively we decide what's an
What's the
area
right
that
thing
we're
to look
particularly
at?
interested
Right.
in learning and growing from.
Okay.
So that it could be any area.
Okay.
And we've had TriState here for other areas. This
Yeah.
was just the most recent visit, even though
Right, be it
2018 feels like a long
2018,
time ago,
right.
but they had
Yeah.
also been here in 2015 and prior to that. So they have done other areas. And this
Yeah.
was just the area that at the time felt really
Sure.
appropriate because
sense,
the
yeah.
learning commitment was getting traction, but was still
Yep.
new enough that this seemed valuable.
But they don't give a grade. The way the auditors do, like they say satisfactory, and you're supposed to be delighted. Do they say like, yeah, we're making great progress, or they don't? The sense is from what you just said that they felt confident that we're making good progress towards that goal. Continuing to ask the question, well, why are we doing it? I think that's healthy in a lot of cases. But they don't culminate in a grade.
They're not a
of any sort.
grading institution, but they are, they're a constructive feedback institution. So if the concerns were more significant, we would hear more about the concerns. We heard some areas where there's room for, and we know that there's room for growth, and we're interested in how they see that. But that's more the model that they're interested in. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Is there, this is more of a logistical tri-state question. So if let's say there was a specific content area that we knew someone who was in tri-state was really excelling in, can we request like, hey, can we have we have a principal come to your school and observe for a day? Like, is it like kind of an open door policy between the 48 districts? That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the, so I go to the superintendent study group. So, I build relationships with people through there, and then it becomes very easy to reach out to somebody and say, could we come on a visit and see a more informal kind of visit and make a connection that way?
That's cool. Great.
Yeah. That's one of the big benefits of having this kind of partnership.
Awesome.
Ilana.
It sounds really the shared learning across different staff members seems like a wonderful resource to have. I was just wondering if there were you sort of said that we could identify new questions. So were there additional things that they looked at, or was it again, just solely focused kind of on looking back at the learning commitment a couple of years later?
Yeah, that's the structure. When they've done one of their big visits, they do a follow-up on the same topic. And then the next time around, it'll be a new topic.
And then I know it just happened, but with the why question, since it came up last time and this time, do you have some preliminary thoughts on how that might be, how you might approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it actually influenced our thinking very quickly because they came back the end of last week.
Yeah.
We had our staff development day Tuesday. We added a very short session on that day where we spoke to the entire, it sort of said to us, we need to put this back in front of people again and at least be talking to people about why we're doing this work. So it changed that a little bit, and then we'll keep thinking as we move forward, where are other places where we can put this in front of people and think about it together.
I mean, I love that point just around the why, because it's so much about what the learning commitment is, about relevancy and making it, experiential and stuff. So it's great that it got reinforced among the staff on Tuesday.
Mhm.
Look forward to seeing more of that. Great.
Marjorie, it's slightly off topic, but maybe it's on the same learning commitment topic, if I may. Do we have a benchmark? Do we have some way to know that we are, intellectually engaging and relevant, and there is an active learning environment? Do we have some scale by which we can measure that and establish a benchline? And we probably talked a little bit about this when we had that meeting, but is there some way for us to sort of evaluate how are we doing against that learning commitment, given that we've stuck with it for quite a number of years now?
Yeah, so that's a part of what this visit was about, was to ask this group to come in and take a look and see for us, because, we do this all the time. Our administrators are walking through buildings on a regular basis. We're in meetings with our teachers, they're visiting each other's classrooms, et cetera. We had this outside group come and we asked them, this is where we think we might be, but we want you to come and take a look and give us feedback on how you think we're doing. And again, the reason I stressed the emphasis on how Tri-State's got started, the traditional assessments that schools have don't necessarily particularly measure those things well. They measure content knowledge retention to a degree. They measure a certain amount of compliance and how well students are doing what's been asked of them. But over time, as we've realized, there's a lot more in the way of skills that we want our students to be thinking about in terms of their growing curiosity, their understanding of the world around them, their connection to the world around them, they're interested in making change in the world around them, that those traditional benchmarks don't measure. We do well on most of those traditional benchmarks. So we're looking for ways, and it's quite honestly, it's not as easy to numerically measure those things, which is why observation and narrative is very helpful.
Just related to looking for evidence of the learning commitment and its traction, are you able to participate in learning walks throughout the buildings in a manner similar to the manner in which you were able to participate pre-COVID,
Oh, yeah.
now? Okay,
Yeah, those have returned.
great.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions before we move on? Well, thank you very much. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the update, and thank you for persevering with Tri-State and making sure that we had the opportunity for some closure on the experience that we had embarked on back in 2018. We appreciate that. Okay, I think this brings us to our opportunity for public forum. So now we're at 10.01, and thank you again to community members for joining us tonight and for your patience. For those who maybe haven't participated in public forum previously, I'll just mention that this is our portion of the meeting reserved entirely to hear from you. So please don't be surprised when we are just in listening mode and we're not going to engage in any back and forth. We do ask that you please introduce yourself and let us know where in the district you live, or if you have children in one of our school buildings. We appreciate knowing that. If you're not a resident of the district, please tell us where you're from. We request that you please try to limit your remarks to approximately 3 minutes. We do have quite a few people who are waiting to speak tonight, so we do appreciate your willingness to keep your remarks to about 3 minutes, and we'll try to help you with that as best we can. And I think we're ready to invite the first speaker, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jake Kempin. Thank you.
1 sec, sorry. Okay, hi, my name's Jake Kempin. I'm in 11th grade. I go to John Jay. I'm part of the Saga Club, which is kind of like a LGBTQ based club. And I'm bringing to the table a potential policy to be adapted that we've been calling the SRB policy. So a large percentage of of the school students identify as either transgender or non-binary. In an attempt to be as inclusive as possible in the school, on behalf of Saga, I'm proposing a bill which will be referred to as the SRB policy, or the Students' Rights to Bathrooms policy. And that being said, it will allow...
I'm sorry, would you just mind to say that again? Students' rights to?
Bathrooms policy.
Bathrooms, thank you. I just didn't hear you. Thank you.
Yep. So it will allow students to use the bathroom corresponded to the gender they may identify as, regardless of their assigned gender or sex at birth. It's to be noted that at the moment, there's no firm policy set in place allowing transgender students' rights in regards to the usage of bathrooms. And today I stand before you requesting your support for this policy. The other part of this is in regards to gender neutral bathrooms. There's about 3 or 4 gender neutral bathrooms in the school. However, the gender neutral bathroom in Q Hall is really the only bathroom that's handicap accessible for our peers who have physical disabilities and are using wheelchairs or whatnot, which kind of makes it unreliable to use if you feel most comfortable using that bathroom. The other issue is there's one in the nurse's office, but it's also the only one close in proximity to the nurse, which is difficult because there's a lot of sick and ill kids. And so that's also not such a reliable place to go. Oh, wow, I only have 40 seconds. Okay. Basically, to get to the point, we formally request that at the minimum, both bathrooms in the library, because one of them is usually locked, that both be unlocked to be able to use through the school day, and that students will be able to have the right to use the bathroom of their choosing based on their gender orientation or identity, as well as where they feel the safest, because after all, our number one priority is safety. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake. Our next speaker is Beth. Sure, please.
Really quick, just into addition to that, I was petitioning around the school and I have over 85 signatures from students in favor of the
Thank you. Would you like
policy.
to leave those with us? You don't have to. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you're welcome.
I kind of have to make some photocopies of it.
No
but,
problem.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Beth Uretsky.
My name is Beth Uretsky. I live in Cross River. I have a son that graduated John Jay High School in 2019, and a son that's currently in the middle school in 8th grade. When one situation happens, you say, okay, things can happen. When multiple things happen over the years, last 5 years, you start to see a pattern. And it's a pattern that I'm not happy about. First of all, 5 years ago, we had a situation here in town about swastikas. There was one meeting. There was nothing really was accomplished. There was really no follow-up. My husband and I at that meeting were yelled at, and it was allowed, which should never have happened. My children felt discriminated against, and it was not acceptable. Luckily, the situation kind of resolved itself and it stopped happening. So we said, okay, we just moved here. Things happen, could happen in any town. One thing, we let it go. Then Parkland, Florida happened. Next Board of Ed meeting, my husband and I came to the meeting. We spoke about how the middle school and the high school, especially, had so many open doors. Why can't we just close them? I even said at that meeting, I don't want our next conversation to be shoulda, coulda, woulda, and didn't. We've learned through the last 5, 6 years, especially, that this could happen in communities that you would never expect it to happen. If it can happen there, it can happen here. 2.5 years ago, my son at the time my younger son at the time was in 5th grade at Increase Miller. He was assaulted on the bus by a fellow student. He's also a special needs kid. And while, yes, he is verbal, he has such a good heart that he did not want to get the other kid in trouble, even though approximately 8 to 10 other kids jumped in to help him out. That day, it happened at 8 o'clock in the morning on the way to school. I didn't get a phone call until 4:30 that afternoon, with the excuse that there was an investigation to be done. The investigation still wasn't complete, but I still got a phone call at 4:30, as opposed to by 8:30 in the morning. By not getting that phone call, lack of communication, it took away my right as a parent to have my son examined by our own pediatrician. He was not examined at all by anybody medical. And at the time, the principal and the assistant principal had to be out of the building for a meeting, which is fine, it happens. School psychologist at the time was the one who evaluated my son. no medical background, but he thought he had the right to do so according, as he said, according to policy. The next meeting, I did have a meeting. The next day I did have a meeting with the assistant principal and him. And I told him that it was totally unacceptable, the process in which it happened. So I asked the Board of Ed and Mr. Selesnik to please reevaluate how that policy is written and to please go back to the drawing board and rewrite that policy. A parent should have been included from the get-go, especially when there was a physical altercation. That should, again, never have happened. Now we come to this last year with special ed. I don't have to reiterate everything that's happened, everything you guys have gone through, what these parents come to meeting after meeting to speak about.
And pardon me, please pardon me, but I'm just going to observe that we're past the 3 minutes.
I'm
Just to
almost
alert
done.
you. Thank you.
Parents feel they're being ignored. There's really not much communication. If the board didn't know what was happening or Mr. Selesnik didn't know what was happening, that's bad enough. But now that the board and Mr. Selesnik has been aware of this for months and we're still here discussing it is a problem. Again, leads to a pattern. And last but not least, the board has a responsibility, not the Lewisboro Police Department, to put an SRO at the high school. I don't want to hear about budget because you find a budget for anything else you want to put into that budget. An SRO needs to be put in a full-timer right away. You need to find the money. That is why you're elected and hired to do that job. The bottom line is we need more accountability, more communication, and more inclusivity. We need to get back to being one town as one team. And I beg you to please go back to the drawing board and do so. If you need help from the community, I know there are many parents here, including myself, plus others who are not here tonight, who are willing to help out. It's not like you don't have the support of people willing to do. Please do what's right. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next speaker is Jacqueline Klein Novik.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Klein Novik. I'm a community member like many others who have been standing by, watching and waiting these last months. Watching and waiting to see how our Board of Ed and our superintendent, Mr. Selesnik, resolve the profoundly serious issues uncovered in our special education program and discussed here by parents and concerned community members repeatedly. A growing number of us are watching and waiting for recognition, communication, and a path forward. It has been months, and the response has been dismal. It's been cold, and it's been inadequate. As a community member and a parent of 3 children who have gone through this school district from beginning till end, I can tell you that this is not a good look, nor is it a good feel. I wear 2 caps in this community, one as a resident and parent, and the other as a professional. 30 years in practice as a special educator, speech language pathologist, evaluator, and child advocate. I have learned many things over the years, including 1, there are always reasons behind a child's behavior. Be proactive, not necessarily reactive. 2, continuing education and supervision are beyond important. 3, most parents are knowledgeable and helpful regarding their children. What they don't know, they will seek out. 4, communication is key. I am urging this board and this superintendent to reconsider their approach. Come together, communicate, and work with parents. Build back trust. With patience and respect, needed changes can happen. For a minute or two, I will shift to address a related issue, the reading program in our district. With my professional cap on, I will tell you that I'm an Orton Gillingham trained therapist providing evidence-based instruction to dyslexic children for the past 30+ years. It is more than discouraging to hear that KLSD has reinvested for more Lucy Calkins' TC program with the plethora of articles out there containing research about its ineffectiveness for children who do not learn to read and spell with ease. I could go on and tell you the facts as to why this program is an extremely poor choice, but time does not permit. But the information is out there in abundance, accessible to anyone. While I'm glad that KLSD has invested in some foundations and Wilson reading programs, which are evidence-based, I can tell you that there are huge cracks in the system and that KL kids are failing. How do I know this? Because for years now, these Katona-Lewisboro kids have been landing on my doorstep for appropriate reading instruction. These are KL kids, our kids, that are really struggling to read because they aren't getting the instruction they need in school. Mr. Selesnik, Ms. Ford, and other Board of Ed members, it's not enough to offer some foundations in Wilson, it's how it is implemented. As someone who specializes in evidence-based reading instruction and dyslexia, I recognize the issues. One, proper identification, not just in K through 2. Intensity of the program, fidelity to the program, supervision and review of the program. This is something we can do. It's fixable, it's doable. All kids should be able to learn to read in district. I urge you to be open to a literacy committee, open to the research, be open to making changes to benefit all children. Going back to the alarming events of last spring and the lack of appropriate response to some extremely serious issues, I'm urging all of you to work together with us, the community that you are here to serve. We are a tight community of people that care deeply and are supporting each other in growing numbers.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to observe that the time has passed.
I'm almost
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you. We are all watching and waiting intently to see the next steps of how these educational issues are handled by all of you. Just yesterday, I was talking to the mom of one of my clients, just from a little bit further north, district further north, trying to reschedule a session. I told her I was leaving the office early today to speak at a BOE meeting. And she said, "Oh, I know what's going on in your district, Katona-Lewisboro." She said, "We love downtown Katona and had been looking at houses there, but now it's off the list." I didn't know what to say, and I always know what to say. Lovely family, this is a shame. Please give these issues the attention that our children and our community deserve. We need you to be responsive. Thank you.
Thank you. Elio Moschetta.
Elio Machetta, South Salem, been a resident since '92. My kids have come through John Jay and graduated. I'm here to support the SRO or the lack of an SRO. Here are some thoughts about the safety and security of our John Jay students, the teaching staff, other employees, and all who pass through the halls of the school. There is little doubt that everyone involved wants a safe and secure teaching environment. The difficult part is how to accomplish the task. What occurred in Sandy Hook, just about 17 miles away, as well as other incidents in schools across the country, was a game changer. The best way to prevent crime is by having a sworn, uniformed police officer present. In the event of an incident, that officer can immediately radio for assistance where other officers, as well as state troopers, can respond. Today, because of the aforementioned school shootings, police departments are trained to quickly respond and handle the situation in order to preserve lives. There's nothing better than having a Lewisboro police officer assigned to the school. Of course, it's easier said than done. Who will pay for it? I feel strongly that the school district should pick up the cost. I have several reasons as well as questions. Perhaps there are ways through grants to help offset the cost. In addition, I will put my money where my mouth is by knowing that at some point, the cost could be a part of my school tax. The bottom line for me is what price can we put on one or several lives? Another thought is the greeters throughout the rest of the schools in the district could establish a rapport and a direct line of communication with the school resource officer. Any suspicious incidents can be reported directly to the SRO. Our police department should be left with the task at hand, policing the town. With the new state mandates such as body cameras, which are not simply strapping a camera on to an officer, but rather other logistics involved, it has to be difficult for our police department to do it all with a limited budget. Also, an aspect of police reform is for our officers to be involved with the community. What better way to accomplish this? I believe a school resource officer present is necessary for all. One officer who has the responsibility and develops the expertise in working with the school staff and students in maintaining a safe environment. For those that are unaware, on October 21st, a gun threat was called in to Katona Lewisboro Elementary. It became public knowledge. On October 24th, I received a call from the Bedford Police Department, embarrassed during that call in front of my family and friends. The purpose of that call was the superintendent thought that I was the person that made the gun threat. This is happening here, not just in Virginia. This is what's going on. I got 30 years worth of time banked up. Everybody get on their case. Let's get it done. They're putting lives at stake because of dollars they want to save. You want my letter? It was in the KL Times today. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Fields.
Hello, I'm Robin Fields. I've lived in Lewisboro for 33 years. I raised 3 children in this school district. They're all grown now. 2 of those children had special needs. I'm a speech language pathologist in this community, and I've worked with many of the special needs families. I'm here tonight to show my support for these families, for the parents and for the children. I implore you, for the sake of the children and for our entire community, to listen to the parents, respond to these parents, meet with them, and make a sincere, honest effort to address their concerns. You need to fix the broken special education department. Mr. Superintendent, you were just talking about striving for improvement. We don't need a tri-state committee to know this is where it has to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Wiles.
Sorry if I'm taking up time. When I put my name on there, it wasn't actually to make a comment. I thought I was just supposed to put my name on there.
Thank
Sorry.
you. No problem. Thank you. Meredith Black.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to continue to express my concerns and frustration with the reading programs being used in the general education classroom, and let you know that I'm not alone in these concerns. During the pandemic, I submitted a parent petition to the district with over 170 signatures, but you advised that that wasn't an appropriate matter to raise the concerns. So I asked if you would consider putting together a panel. The district has also not proceeded with that type of involvement of the parents to date. So I'm going to go about this a different way. The district seems willing to do surveys on all kinds of things. So I'd ask the district to do a survey of its own population of parents and students and ask the question whether parents and students have concerns with their reading instruction, whether they are paying for tutoring or private school with regard to reading instruction, to ask whether they believe their student needs additional help in this area, and ask if there are ways that they believe the district could improve those services to the students. I think that the district can do its own homework in addition to talking to parents. And maybe this is the first way to open that door to communication with the district seems hesitant to go into. So I hope that you consider it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Erica Glick.
Good evening. My name is Erica Glick, and I'm here again to speak about the literacy issues facing our district. to respond to some inaccuracies presented in an email so that they can be publicly corrected. And I'm going to again request that our district reconsiders their refusal to establish a literacy committee. I'm again asking this board and this administration to engage with the community and our concerns. First, I'd like to remind you that my daughter was here 2 months ago, a young lady of just 10 years old, speaking so eloquently about how you failed her, how you discriminated against her, how you denied her of her basic right to read. Following her public comments, she was told that she was courageous. She was told that she did a great job. And Mr. Selesnik, you quoted her and her classmate when you said, "We can do better. We need to do better." Last week, I shared a very recent scathing independent study of the Lucy Calkins Teachers College Units of Study, the program we utilize in district. I will not go into the embarrassing details of the study, as I also shared this with the board as well as the administration. I will, however, correct misinformation. This study was not from 2018, as was stated by Mr. Selesnik and Ms. Ford. This was the copyright date of the program they were reviewing. The review was from October 2021. Critical reading is an important skill for our children and for us as adults. So I feel compelled to correct this error. Of note, I also shared a scathing review from 2020 by another independent organization back in 2020, Student Achievement Partners. This review was also embarrassing and was shared with the board and the administration. The response from the board president, Ms. Schiff, was simply thanking me for sharing my concerns and my perspective. My overall feeling to the administrative response to my emails are buzzwords and lip service. While I'm happy to hear you feel Teachers College is meeting several essential pillars of literacy, I obviously disagree, but would be happy to engage. I'm happy to hear we have allegedly introduced Heggerty into our classrooms. I'd like to hear more about this. It was mentioned once previously as a screening tool, but now we've indicated it's in the classrooms. If this is in fact true, that's wonderful. I obviously have many more questions. How are we using it? Is it in the teacher's hands? Has there been training? Have we purchased it and it's sitting in a supply closet somewhere? Are we measuring the progress since it's been introduced? If so, how? You mentioned foundations in your email reply for our word study program, but in a previous Board of Ed meeting, it was presented that we were using Teachers College phonics. Further, several years ago, I was told by my child's teacher that they were piloting Teachers College phonics. When I brought this up to administration, it was vehemently denied. As you can see, lots of conflicting information to the public here. I've been dismissed with comments such as my side has research and your side has research. Comments such as this will never close the circle. If we're ever to improve, we must look critically at what we're doing. Simply saying that you have a different opinion on the matter is not enough. What does the latest research say? Please provide me with the research that you reference in support of Teachers College, as I've been asking for it for years since our initial meeting several years ago. As you've said, Mr. Selesnik, both things can be true. You can feel that Teachers College is meeting the needs of our students. I, including Lucy Calkins and many others, disagree. Lucy Calkins herself says her program is not effective for teaching dyslexic students. And current statistics tell us that dyslexia affects 15 to 20% of all students. So we are essentially discriminating against a rather large segment of our population.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to observe that the time has passed.
Yes, I'll be finishing up.
Thank you.
I get it. To look critically at what we are doing is a huge ask. I understand that we're potentially looking at our systems, our policies, our programs, our procedures, and saying we could do better. That is not easy to do. To look critically and potentially say what we did wasn't enough or could be improved upon. Teachers go into the field to help. It's a huge pill to swallow to believe what they're doing isn't helping. Same could be said for administration. We must be willing to loosen our grip on a method that doesn't work for all and begin our own journey towards evidence-based instructional methods that help all and harm none. When we lay down our weapons and choose to see the kids, like my daughter, who have the most loss in this fight over balanced versus structured literacy, it changes how we see everything. Because what's true is that our children are the casualties of the adults who hold on to methods that science tells us fail. While I'd like to go on line by line to your responses over the years with a laundry list of additional questions, this is not the appropriate way to do it. And this is what I've been trying to say. There needs to be a committee or there needs to be a forum. I write, you write. I speak, you speak. We get nowhere fast. And even more disturbing, it seems the board has been instructed to no longer respond during public comment. Whether this is a directive from our legal team or our administration is unclear, but it speaks volumes and it's not a good look for our district.
Thank you.
If we actually
I'm going
intend to
I'm
do
going
better,
ask you
we
to
must
please
try
wrap up.
something
Thank you.
different.
Thank you. Thank you. Billy Turbert.
Hi, my name is Billy Turbert. I live in Katona, and I am a parent of a non-speaking autistic kindergarten boy in Increase Miller. He does not speak, he cannot communicate, and is extremely resourceful, but he gets very frustrated because he is non-speaking. Like the BOE, he will not tell us what's going on. Unlike the BOE, it's not because he cannot. No, it's not because he won't, it's because he cannot. He cannot sit down with us and have an open dialogue. This is heartbreaking for us as parents, because he is such a happy boy who uses every tool possible to regulate himself, yet he cannot express how he feels so simply. You all have the tools at your disposal, and you're not using them in the public's best interest. That is heartbreaking. Eli is non-speaking. The BOE certainly has this tool that my son does not have, but don't use it. We are in the dark about certain processes that we need to be a part of. This is a public school. Are we not the public? Are you not hearing us? I hate that I compared my son or used him in an analogy to this system, but he deserves better, and our community deserves better as well. Thank you for hearing me. I hope you listened. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Polizato.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Polizato. My husband, Lansing Cottrell, and I have 3 children in the school district. One is at the high school and 2 at Increase Miller. I appreciate the opportunity to address you tonight. This is our first year in the district. In our prior district, I was fortunate to be very involved in the PTA Council and particularly in candidate debates between prospective school board members prior to the elections last year, which gave me a chance to better educate myself about the roles and responsibilities of school boards. I want to acknowledge the complexity of the work and the many competing priorities that need to be balanced. In that district, unfortunately, during the run-up to the election and during the debates themselves, the conversation devolved from problem solving and discussion of how to allocate resources to an all-out war of opinions and even personal vilification of the candidates and their respective supporters. In that divisive environment, we lost sight of the long-term goals of the district. Ultimately, outcomes for children in that district will not be as good as they could have been if that energy and effort could have been directed instead towards collaboration on shared goals. I'm aware, even though we're new, that a similarly polarized dynamic is at play here as well, particularly relating to several incredibly upsetting incidents which occurred in the recent past. As a newcomer, I don't think that it's my place to comment on those events other than to say that parents who have spoken to me just in the short time we've been here feel a deep hurt and a loss of trust, and they're seeking both an acknowledgement of their pain and a collaborative approach to ensuring that nothing of the kind could ever happen again. I recognize that members of the board may not feel that they can speak freely and may even feel that it puts them at risk if they express regret or condolences for what happened to these children or engage in dialogue with parents or other representatives of the special education community. But as a result, the divide between parents and administration is growing. Escalation of ill feelings will drive us further apart and further reduce our capacity to accomplish shared goals. Shutting down communication leads to greater misunderstandings as people inevitably fill in the gaps with their worst assumptions about another's intent. I know that there are complicated legal and ethical concerns here. I'm convinced, and I hope I'm not being naive to be convinced, that it's still possible to resolve these issues in a way that will make our school community stronger, more resilient, more comprehensive, and more sympathetic if we approach one another as human beings first, with compassion, empathy, and vulnerability. On the topic of communication, my son, several weeks ago, who has severe food allergies, multiple food allergies, happened to eat something that no one had any idea whether it was safe for him. And I discovered that when he came home from school and hadn't eaten his lunch, and I asked him why. And I had to go first to the nurse. The nurse had nothing to say. She referred me to the principal. The principal took a full day, I assume, to consult with whoever he needed to consult with. And then it was just sort of the curtain came down. I got minimal information. I still don't know whether the person who discovered it didn't tell anyone or whether she told someone and no one told me. But that kind of thing can't happen. It simply can't happen. His life was at risk and no one knew for hours, or I didn't know anyway. And I wasn't able to give any input on what should have happened next. Fortunately, he was fine. We might not be that lucky another time. In conclusion, I want to focus here on how the central task of a school board, as I understand it, which is to oversee the activities of the school system so that all students can have the best possible experience and outcomes, relates to how we approach inclusion and equity, specifically for students with particular needs that place them in one way or another out of the mainstream, and why that is so critical, not only for these students, but for all students. And my husband's going to continue our remarks in his allotted time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lansing Guttrell.
Thank you. So Sarah mentioned I'm the inadequate co-pilot of the 3 kids in the school district. And we had one other that graduated in the previous school district further down south. What I wanted to mention was about when the news broke about Elijah McClain's death in 2019. We had a very strong visceral reaction to that, both because it was so tragic and because, like many, we could see how his neurodiversity factored into the events as they played out. We also have a son named Elijah, who Sarah described before. He's our 3rd grader. He also sings and talks to himself. He skips along the street. He uses scripted phrases to express himself. He can struggle to process instructions and questions. He gets lost in his thoughts, misses social cues, avoids eye contact, avoids conflict. He too is gentle, loving, generous, and peaceful. If you ask him about his friends, he will name every child in his class, and he genuinely means it. Elijah's IEP has dozens of goals targeting the acquisition of skills, including social skills. He works hard, and his therapists work hard, and his teachers work hard too, as he tries to learn the language and behavior of community and social belonging. But belonging is a two-way street, as Sarah was saying. Do those outside the disability community expend equal effort teaching kids to meet ours halfway, to model and measure inclusion and empathy? Elijah McClain died because those who encountered him that night did not understand and value him as a member of the community. School is the primary place children experience community and experience diversity to whatever degree it exists. If we value diversity and inclusion, the single most important thing our schools can do is to model community, to teach children to see one another as loved, valuable, and welcome, whatever their differences. For children on the spectrum or who otherwise are neurodiverse or disabled, true inclusion is more than simply being present in the classroom. Equitable, inclusive communities where everyone can thrive require long-term, well-funded, consistent efforts following best practice, even if it means adjusting our educational approaches and priorities. Some of Elijah McClain's last words were, "I'm just different. That's all. I'm so sorry." Kids in the disability community are working hard to achieve their goals in a system that wasn't designed with them in mind. Can we all work just as hard to build communities where their path will be a little easier? Our questions to you tonight are: first, what goals has the board set in regard to continuing to build a school community where children are taught to connect with, understand, and value one another as equals? And second, do the superintendent and the school board hold themselves to the same standards of empathy, respect, understanding, and inclusion, both in their approach to addressing the concerns of parents in the disability community regarding the serious incidents in which children were harmed, and also going forward and working with parents on other issues that arise? Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah Golia.
According to your policy 1900, the Board of Education believes that positive parent and family engagement is essential to student achievement. This engagement refers to the participation of parents in regular, two-way, and meaningful communication with the board and superintendent. The reality is very different since us parents have not been able to have meaningful two-way communication, and the president of this board sees us as a small group disconnected with the majority. How hard is it to give us the parents an update about what have you done since these two abuses were reported? What has been done since these events happened to avoid future abuses? It is common in a scenario like this that schools hire an independent consultant to audit the entire department, because we all know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and in most cases, it will reveal areas that need improvement. I know it's easy to believe that abuse does not happen, but Mr. Selesnik well knows that sexual abuse and mistreatment can happen even under his own oversight. Crisis presents opportunities for new approaches to be considered. Cameras in self-contained classrooms are already a reality for states like Georgia, Texas, and West Virginia, because families should not have to worry whether or not our children are safe at school. Trust can only be achieved by creating a culture of transparency. What could be more important than safety? Perhaps the learning from the pandemic experience is more relevant to discuss in a learning cafe. Unfortunately, I could not come to the cafe event, but would like to remind the board that the students who need special education services were the most affected during the pandemic. While all students face the challenges of the health crisis, economic disruption, and use of new technology, students with disabilities were often unable to receive IEP mandate services or receive them remotely, potentially limiting the quality of the services or its effectiveness, particularly for the therapies that require hands-on, face-to-face interaction or specialized equipment. Thomas DiNapoli, the New York State Comptroller, recently said, an essential part of this year's school reopening plans should be determining how to compensate for the learning losses students suffered and to ensure they succeed in their educational goals. State education aid will increase by $8.4 billion over the next few years. In addition, New York was allocated over $15 billion in federal emergency. DiNapoli also says schools districts should prioritize spending states and federal aid on special education programs and related services to help address short-term setbacks and long-standing inequities for students with disabilities. Meanwhile, this district cut 7 full-time special education assistants and aides. So what are your plans for compensating the learning losses suffered by special education students as a result of the pandemic? What are your plans for the additional funding received? It is part of your job, Mr. Selesnik, to establish and maintain communication with community groups which are interested or involved in the educational programs of the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Golia.
Matthew Golia, reading for Shoshana
Actually,
Barron.
I'm sorry, pardon me. We're having speakers speak for themselves, and then at the end, I'll call individuals up who are reading on behalf of others. Thank you.
So I'm going to read for myself first.
Yes, please. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, this is my speech. In the Katona-Lewisboro Times today, I read that there was a 911 hang-up call made from a payphone inside of John Jay Middle School. Surveillance cameras inside the school helped police identify the caller. Why can we have cameras monitoring our payphones, but not in our self-contained classrooms where our most vulnerable students have been physically assaulted, physically restrained, and secluded? I've noticed that even though members of the public have spoken at the past two Board of Education meetings on critical issues in our school district related to special education and the reading program, the Board of Education's recent tactic has been to remain silent and stonewall the public during board dialogue. If you think that tactic will cause us to give up, I can promise you that we will not. While I agree that this is a great strategy for this board, considering that with the exception of Trustee Schneier, your responses are often insensitive and dismissive, I will remind you of the first sentence of your own policy 1230 that says, quote, "The board recognizes its responsibility to listen and respond to public comment." Once again, the board is demonstrating its unwillingness to hold itself accountable to even its own policies. On August 19th, the superintendent sent out a message to the community saying, amongst other things, there would be additional training to support students with autism, de-escalation strategies, and ongoing additional autism training for staff throughout the year. That evening at the Board of Education meeting, Trustee Schneier asked the superintendent about this additional autism training. The superintendent's response was, quote, "I don't want to give the wrong answer, and I don't have the answer tonight." So 3 months later, I would like to ask the superintendent and the Board of Education if you could now please elaborate on this additional training that you promised to the public. Trustee Schneier also asked the superintendent about the superintendent's claim of outside consultants coming in, asking, can you elaborate more? The superintendent's response was, quote, "Not at this time. How about at this time?" Finally, on August 19th, Trustee Schneier stated to her fellow board members, "It's time to have the meeting. This meeting should have happened, and I don't understand why we haven't." Well, it still hasn't happened. We would like to invite you to a town hall style discussion on December 5th in Katona, where we can all discuss it together. Finally, on October 18th, the superintendent wrote to our group saying, "At the moment, I'm prioritizing work on finding an appropriate consultant. Cannot commit at this time to ongoing meetings. I will keep you informed of our progress and look forward to future opportunities for collaboration." We'd like to know what work has been done since October 18th. And when will we be kept informed? And when will these future opportunities for collaboration be? Thank you.
Thank you. Hope Turbert.
Good evening. My name is Hope Turbert. I have a child at Increase Miller. He's in the self-contained class. He's autistic and non-speaking. It is not easy having a child who cannot speak. We face challenges every single day. Sometimes the challenges feel insurmountable and we do not know how to go on, but we always do. When people ask us how we do it, we shrug and say we just do. As hard as it is for us, I can only imagine how hard it is for our child. We are his voice, his protectors, and his advocates. I think some of the parents in this room behind me know how heartbreaking it is when your child cannot call you mommy or daddy, say I love you, or tell you when something hurts. Watching your child in pain or upset and having no idea why has to be one of the most helpless feelings a person can possibly experience as a parent. And when our kids come home with mysterious bruises and scratches, and we are forced to wonder what happened, we do not have the privilege of knowing. Anyone who knows my son will tell you he is smart, resourceful, and sweet. He faces many challenges, but he never lets that stop him. He loves to jump, take hot showers, and be tickled. His favorite food is waffles, and he loves Mickey Mouse. He likes watching music videos with his dad and wrestling with his brother. You might be asking, why am I telling you this? The answer, I am trying to humanize him. How absurd is it that I feel the need to stand up here and convince you all that my son is in fact a person? Mr. Selesnik and members of the board, you may be feeling defensive right now. You might think it is incredibly unfair of me to imply that you do not view my child as a person. Maybe you feel I am being unnecessarily combative. But I am curious if any of you have ever attempted to get to know a nonverbal autistic person. I mean, really get to know them as a person. And I want to know if a speaking neurotypical child had been choked, shoved against a wall, locked in a bathroom, or physically restrained every single day for 2 months straight by a teacher or other school staff member, and parents demanded accountability and change for these incidents, would you still be sitting here calling those parents combative? I read the Lewisboro Police blotter the other day. I learned that on October 15th, 2021, middle school students used a payphone inside the middle school to place a prank phone call. Police were called and they used surveillance cameras to discover who placed the prank calls. And aside from being very shocked that there are actual payphones in the middle school, I felt angry reading this. There is no way of finding out how many autistic children were abused at Increase Miller because there are no cameras in that classroom. But at least surveillance cameras helped us catch the dangerous middle school prank callers. Mr. Selesnik, about a month ago, I sat in a meeting with you and we told you what we envisioned for an independent audit of the special education program. And you dutifully listened and you took notes on your laptop. And then abruptly you shut your laptop and you told us you cannot continue working with us if we keep coming to the BOE meetings and being combative. I have obviously had plenty of time to think things over since it has now been a month, and I am truly struck by how advocating for our children to be treated like human beings has somehow become combative. These are our kids. We will crawl to the ends of this earth for our children. We will never stop advocating for our children. Call us combative if you wish. We are simply being parents and doing what any loving parent would do, and we will not stop advocating. I know I'm out of time, Ms. Schiff. You don't have to observe it, but I do have a few questions. Mr. Selesnik, on October 19th, 2021, you sent an email to the entire district saying that on September 1st and September 2nd, appropriate staff would receive additional training to support students with autism and further training on de-escalation strategies. You also said you were working to provide additional autism-specific training for staff at other times during the school year. My question to you tonight, what autism-specific training has been provided and to whom on September 1st and 2nd? And what other autism-specific training do you have planned for this year? My second question, in the same email, you stated—
I'm sorry, I am going to interrupt to ask, how many questions are there?
3.
Okay, thank you. Are you almost done then? After that, is that the end?
Yes.
Thank you.
So in the same email, you stated you were vetting outside consultants with expertise in autism, neurodiversity, and communication, and I'm quoting now, who will visit this fall and provide feedback. Mr. Selesnik, today is November 4th. We are well into the fall. What update do you have for us? Question 3, this one's for you, Ms. Schiff. I have sat at enough of these meetings to know by now that prior to each public comment portion of a meeting, you say, we will now go into active listening mode. Please do not be disappointed if we do not respond to you. I also know that at the past 2 meetings, parents have gotten up here during the public comments portion of the meeting to express grave concerns regarding special education in the district. I sat in the audience through the adjournment of these 2 meetings. When it came time for board dialogue, all members of the board were silent, as was Mr. Selesnik. And I would like to remind you and your board colleagues of policy 1230, public participation at board meetings, as Mr. Golia pointed out, states that it is the board's responsibility to listen and respond to public comment. So Ms. Schiff, my question for you, why have you and your colleagues refused to respond to us for the past 2 meetings? We have asked for open dialogue over and over, and now it seems we are being given the silent treatment. Those are my questions. And speaking of open dialogue, I hope to see you all on December 5th at the Gatona Presbyterian Church, 4 p.m., where we will have an open dialogue on special education in Gatona Lewisboro. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Biddle.
Hi, Allison Biddle, Cross River. So I'm Allison Biddle, and I'm here with you again because not much has changed, and it has only gotten worse as there is no longer a school resource officer on staff. The school district can say what they want and make small gestures and overtures, but we want an outside independent consultant with no links or connections to the school district or its members to evaluate this entire special education program, and we want it now. As a mother whose son and daughter will be starting school in the next few years, It is flabbergasting that any education professional would allow employees to put their hands on our children. And to wait days or weeks, if ever, to notify parents is unacceptable. We also need autism training for the entire school staff during the school year, from teachers and administrators to the janitorial staff, and everyone who comes into contact with our autistic children need to know how to handle the challenge of a child on the spectrum. It is very concerning to hear about the issues with our literacy program, and that there are so many children who aren't able to learn to read in our schools. Reading is a fundamental skill that all children have a right to learn in the public schools that our taxes pay for. It is unacceptable that not all students can learn to read in our district. A literacy committee is a simple first step to fixing this program. Why won't you implement this? I'm also upset that there is no longer a school resource officer present at the school. This was in the budget for last year, and if the cost has increased, then the school should be able to adjust the budget accordingly. The town of Lewisboro should not be expected to take on the burden of this increase, as Katona, parts of North Salem, and parts of Pound Ridge are also part of our school district. The expectation of the school and this board that one town should take on this burden, when in fact you already received 78% of our taxes, is not acceptable. You need to take a harder look at your budget, your finances, and find the money for the resource officer. This officer provides a safe and secure teaching environment for the students and staff. With the tragic school shootings, including Sandy Hook nearby in 2012, and the recent threats here, the increase in violence in schools throughout the country, it is more important than ever to have an officer who has the training to deal with any emergency, direct access to the local and state police to get them on site ASAP, and a relationship with the student body so they trust the officer and know that they have their back. I'll keep fighting until all of our children are safe at school. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Rachel Massa. Thank you. Yes, please. Mark Abrams.
Good evening. My name is Mark Abrams. Thanks to the persistence of the families in the KLSD community, this board and this superintendent can no longer hide the far too frequent incidents of neglectful and abusive acts against our children from within the special education department. This board has consistently refused to work collaboratively with the community to address these serious problems. Instead, you've chosen to listen to our stated concerns and later talked amongst yourself about those concerns with us present. Given the frequency in which your comments were later used to point out your glaring disconnect and utter lack of concern, you appear to now have chosen a tactic to not speak amongst yourselves at all during the meeting. Do you really believe this tactic will be a benefit to you? Of course, this runs counter to your own stated obligation to discuss concerns raised by members of the community. Your own silence is a deafening acknowledgement of your failures to live up to your responsibility as board members. A group of concerned parents tried to work with the superintendent, who allegedly was willing to hear us and try and work collaboratively with us. This farcical endeavor consisted of us being presented with a tight agenda set by the superintendent, who just wanted to only listen to us. We made it very clear to him that his definition of collaboration defied any dictionary definition of that word. We wanted to be involved with every step of the process toward having the entire special education department audited by an outside group specializing in the understanding and implementation of best practices in special education. During our second meeting, the superintendent had mentioned the TriState group. We responded that we strongly preferred a much more independent and specialized group. He wanted a very limited scope for the audit and was not happy that we wanted a comprehensive audit of the special education department. At the end of this meeting, the superintendent went off on a diatribe about how he could not trust us to work collaboratively with him because we have been holding this board and this administration to task, which of course got us to this point in the first place. Since that meeting, we have had no further communications from the superintendent. Given that the KLSD teacher was abusing students in the fall of 2019, you have to wonder why nothing of substance has been done to audit this broken department to date. To say that this board and superintendent have failed us is quite the understatement. The issue of trust raised by the superintendent is quite ironic. In reality, it's the families of the neglected and abused children or the relevant parties who should mistrust you and do mistrust you. Since the board and superintendent steadfastly refuse to work in a transparent and collaborative manner with this community, which they serve, we will begin to set an example for how this process is supposed to work. We will be holding a public, moderated town hall meeting on December 5th. This entire board and our superintendent are invited to partake in a truly open and collaborative exploration of all identified problem areas. This will be an open to the public, live streamed and covered by the media. Your attendance or lack of attendance will be duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Case.
Hi, I'm Katie Case, and I'm a mother of a fourth grader at Meadow Pond Elementary. As you read in my letters I sent last week, I am beyond disappointed with the district's lack of preparedness for quarantine learning. My son was quarantined for 10 days because of a potential exposure to a child 3 rows ahead of him on a 15-minute bus ride with everyone wearing masks. Not only did he physically miss school, but he missed out on 36 hours of learning due to the lack of a viable learning plan for quarantine. How is it that there is no quarantine learning plan in place when we're heading into the 3rd year of COVID? What we experienced last week was not remote learning, it was more like an academic suspension. There was little to no communication from the school in regards to assignments, and the 2 20-minute Zoom sessions each day were pointless busy work, completely unrelated to his classwork. The provision of a district-wide remote teacher is a complete waste of funding. She was teaching sections the students from KES were doing and not the sections my son was assigned. He essentially learned nothing last week. I'm aware that a second teacher has been hired to help with quarantine learning, but it's not enough. We kept our son home fully remote last year, due partly to our health concerns, but mostly because of the hybrid schedule, couldn't provide the day-to-day structure and consistency my son needs to thrive and remain engaged. We know that the classrooms have the ability to Zoom with quarantine children, keeping them at pace with their classmates, yet we're not doing it. Why? Additionally, students receiving special services are at even greater risk of falling behind by being cut off from their teachers, schedules, classmates for these extended periods of time. The way I see it, video cameras in the classroom would help on 2 major fronts right now. One being Zoom for quarantine learning, and the other providing safety and transparency to the parents of children in self-contained classrooms. Quite frankly, the unwillingness to have cameras for Zoom or child safety in the classroom is, if not fishy, then at least negligent. I implore you to revisit Zoom learning for quarantine students. Otherwise, you need to revisit the quarantine protocols entirely and decide whether masks work or not. If they do, then let's stop quarantining kids for no reason. And if they don't, then why are we wearing them in the first place? Governor Lamont just ruled in Connecticut that children wearing masks when exposed do not have to quarantine unless they exhibit symptoms. That makes sense. He's changing protocols to keep kids in school. If we can't change our protocols regarding quarantine, then let's at least get a proper learning plan in place. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Marissa Beatty. You're reading on behalf of her. Gia Miller.
I'm bringing a stool next time. Well, here I am again. I'm sure you're sick of seeing me by now. I know I'm sick of spending my Thursday evenings attending meeting after meeting and paying for a babysitter. But until change occurs, this will be my new normal. And I'm not the only one. There are about 35 letters being read here tonight. Many of us are here once again to talk about the special education department. While we may have different messages to give, there's one general theme present throughout. Very little has been done since we first began attending BOE meetings about almost 6 months ago. Many of us have poured our hearts out to you, publicly or privately. We've shared personal stories about the physical, mental, and/or emotional harm inflicted on our children at the hands of KLSD staff. And yet you still haven't taken our concerns seriously. Instead, you frequently appeared combative toward us, the very people you were elected to represent. What's worse, at the last 2 board meetings, you've chosen to give us the silent treatment. While it may be one of the most effective ways to change a child's behavior, we're adults. The silent treatment won't work on us, especially when it comes to the safety of our children. What are you trying to avoid? What are you trying to hide? From where I sit, what little information that has been communicated to us demonstrates that this group views themselves as a group who puts their needs above those of the community. And it's not just at board meetings, it's in other things related to the board. I'll give you a recent example. A month ago, I requested the BOE's annual superintendent evaluations from the past 6 years. These are records I'm legally allowed to request under the Freedom of Information Law. 3.5 weeks later, I received the records, but all of the comments and ratings were redacted. It was page after page of large black boxes. The only things I could see were the categories that were ranked, the number of pages used for a summary, and the signature lines of the BOE president and Mr. Selesnik. However, of the 6 reports I received, only 2 were actually signed, and those signatures were blacked out as well. So I inquired about the missing signatures and why everything was redacted. I explained that I had called the New York State Council of Superintendents and was told that at a minimum, the final rating must be provided. 5 days later, I received a response from the district's records access officer. She wrote that the board's attorney had advised her that the BOE only needs to release their ratings if they've given the superintendent an overall rating. But because their evaluation instrument doesn't call for an overall rating, there's nothing to provide. And in regards to the missing signatures, she spoke to the BOE president and the superintendent, and she was assured that the completely redacted pages she sent me were the actual evaluations and, quote, the originals on file do not bear the subject signatures. Unfortunately, the information from your attorney is in contrast with the New York State School Board Association. Their website clearly states that the final ratings are actually ratings and comments that are approved by the entire board, not a cumulative rating. So either the board didn't approve the ratings and comments, or you're attempting to hide the reviews. It leaves me wondering about the evaluation process. Does the board do it together as required by law, or is it only done by the president? And I'm supposed to believe that the board president and superintendent simply forgot to sign these legal documents for the past 6 years, for 4 out of the past 6 years? As usual, something doesn't add up. This is one recent example of a microcosm of a much larger problem. We have a board who chooses to bend the rules to their liking, isn't transparent, doesn't demonstrate accountability, and is too close to the superintendent to do their job properly. Why won't you speak to us? Why won't you share your ratings of the superintendent's evaluations? Why won't you conduct an independent, comprehensive evaluation of the special education department? What is it that you're working so hard to try to hide? This isn't a good look for you. You don't come across as a group who is listening to the community and doing what's best for their constituents. Instead, you come across as an exclusive group who simply doesn't care about children. It's time to have a conversation with us so that we can begin to move forward and create an educational environment where all students are safe and able to reach their full potential. I hope you'll join us for a real conversation at our town hall on December 5th at 4 o'clock at the Katona Presbyterian Church. There will be a free taco bar. We've reserved a seat for each of you.
Thank you. Serge Munitz. Victoria Devukaj. Oksana Aronov.
Good evening. I always say I never write anything for these things because the material is always here, and it's always enlightening to hear community members, because when we formed this advocacy around the issues that we were aware of course, as someone said before, we realized very soon that was just the tip of the iceberg. And it was our hope and our impression that that's what the board was there for, as a governing body, as someone who holds the superintendent accountable. However, our board chose to be silent. They chose to immediately side with the superintendent. And it is really not clear whether the board is refusing to acknowledge that anything is wrong or doesn't know how to deal with it. But neither one of those is a particularly good look. It's also very telling, when we see the growing number of people in our advocacy, that only one board member suggested additional avenues for community members to communicate with the board, and that was vehemently shut down when the discussion around Zoom happened a few months ago in this forum. And that's also very telling. I think we're hearing a lot of themes about parents being disconnected, feeling disconnected from the board, parents feeling that the board is too close to the superintendent. And I will tell you that I think we're coming off of a very interesting week where a governor contendant lost an election he probably should have won, in no small part due to quotes like, parents shouldn't tell districts how to teach. And you're coming across as incredibly detached, elitist, and people who are just stuck and don't know what to do and just want this problem to go away, but it can't. We didn't create the problem. The problem existed. And when you have wrongdoing and someone shines a light on it, it's up to you to actually do something about it, because frankly, the source of wealth for this community is its schools. And to the extent that we now have adjacent communities and people, potentially around the county and maybe even farther, not moving to this community because of events that occurred here, it says directly in our wallets. And that is on you folks. This job has changed. It's not enough to have a little gray hairs to be on a board. You have to actually want to bring change, roll up your sleeves, get uncomfortable, get dirty, get in there, ask the uncomfortable questions, and get things done. It's not the same. It's not about just adding it to your LinkedIn profile anymore. This is real hard work. I said that to you the first time I came here. And no, we are not satisfied with what has been done thus far, because as was stated before, we were hopeful, we were heading for a dialogue with the superintendent. He said he will speak to us, then he said he's not sure, then he said he will, and then finally he said that he just doesn't feel safe speaking to us because we come here and we present and shine light on a lot of these things that he's uncomfortable about. I don't know, should a superintendent on whose watch a lot of bad things happen have the comfort to step away from uncomfortable discussions? I'll let you be the judge of that. But to the point of being transparent with your community and not being elitist and actually doing something and engaging in productive dialogue, as was said before, we hope you join us on December 5th at the Presbyterian Church in Katona. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Uretsky.
Good evening, Kevin Uretsky, Cross River. I have a son who already graduated the high school and an 8th grader, and you heard from my much better half earlier. And that's lowballing it when I say much better half. Now you can start the clock. My praising my wife doesn't come out of my time. All right. Rhetorical question for all of you. Have you noticed a theme yet? I've watched from afar over the last few months where a lot of these people have gotten involved in the discussion of special education, did my own research, found out my own facts, because that's what I do for a living. And quite frankly, I'm rather disgusted at the fact that students were improperly handled physically. Okay? Makes me sick to my stomach. It's, I believe, a violation of their civil rights. It's criminal in nature. And I believe the reckoning for that action is coming for both this board and the people involved. That said, over and above and beyond that, the reaction from the board since, and what I've watched from afar over the last several months, is an unfortunate repetitive pattern of behavior of being reactive instead of proactive. You have a problem, solve it. And with all due respect to you, Mr. Selesnik, you've been down this road before. You've been involved in the leadership of a district where students were abused. And whether you like it or not, that means you have to be doing it more cleanly and better than the next guy. That may not be fair, but it is what it is, and it doesn't change the fact. You guys are reactive instead of proactive. My wife talked about several issues. The fact that there were a pattern of swastikas several years ago. There was one meeting, everybody was told to sing Kumbaya and act like a community, and no proactive measures were taken. You had a chance to stand up in front of this community and say, we as a community being led by the school district will not put up with this. But you were reactive, you were not proactive, you didn't do enough. A lot of people, including my wife, have talked about school security. We stood in front of the board after Parkland and said, you need to make changes. Not enough changes have been made at all. The schools are still too wide open. You were reactive instead of proactive. Now you no longer have an SRO because you were gifted a lot of unpaid hours by Frank Secret, who was willing just to be around because that's what he wanted to do. Well, your trial subscription is over and it's time to pay. Stop arguing with the police department and get it done. Because your first job is to make sure our kids come home safely at the end of the day. Get it done. I'll tell you, reactive instead of proactive. This is my personal opinion. This board has been proactive in the last several years about two issues. One is COVID, because you had no choice. The other was the changing of the school mascot because it was a personal agenda of some of the people on the board and the district leadership. And I could care less what the mascot of the high school is. The fact of the matter is, you have to be proactive instead of reactive. And I will say this, and I think I speak for everybody else here. If you're not willing to be proactive, and you're not willing to fix the special education, and you're not willing to ensure the safety of the kids, and you're not willing to do the things that I and a lot of these other people have talked about, then just step down. There's no shame in that. There is no shame in that. I'm almost done, Marjorie. There's no shame in that. If you're not going to act, step aside. It's not an easy job. I wouldn't want it. I'd much rather stand here than sit over there.
Thank you. Are you almost finished? You are out
I
of
just told
time.
you I was almost
Great,
finished,
please sit down. We're
which
ready to
means
move
that you
on.
weren't listening.
Thank you.
I just told you I was almost done, which means you weren't listening, which is exactly what these people have been telling you. So if you're not going to act, step aside and let somebody else take a shot at it. They may do better than you, they may not. But you're in the seats, you ran for the positions, you were hired for the job, do the job. That's all.
Thank you. Susan Polos.
Hi. So unlike almost everybody here, I haven't been here for a long time. Last time I was here was 15 years ago when I was advocating for music teachers when my kids were here at school. So I'm feeling a little post-traumatic stress. But I've done my best to keep up with the district's issues, and I'm concerned about the special education situation. So I just wanted to say that I'm here because I expect at a minimum for our children to be safe and protected within our schools. And I understand that it's been 6 months since members of the community began speaking at board meetings. So I think that it's appropriate for everyone in the community to be aware. I'm a senior and, I pay the taxes, and I also just like to have a voice. I don't agree with everything that's been said. I think we all care about the most vulnerable students among us. We all care about students who can't speak for themselves, and that's why I'm here. I personally think that safety doesn't have anything to do with having a policeman with a gun. I worked in a neighboring district, and I was scared every single day when I went to school and there was a policeman with a gun. I now work in a small school where there is no policeman with a gun, and I am not scared. I think what makes a school safe is an atmosphere, an environment of inclusivity and the feeling of welcoming diversity and equity. And I'm sure you're working towards that. And I just hope that you'll understand that this is something that's a broader community now, that people know about it, that I care about it. I also don't like Lucy Calkins as long as I'm up here. But, but we all have different opinions, right? And you do need to hear them, because we all should have a voice in this community, whether we're, very little or big. And I'm here because I understand that the very little ones here don't really have a voice and have been hurt. and I'm just here to try to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody who wanted to speak on their own behalf has spoken. Have I missed anybody? Okay, thank you. Then it's my pleasure to invite Hope Turbert up to speak on behalf of several individuals, and please just go ahead and speak on behalf of all of those whom you plan to speak for.
Okay, my first letter is from Cheryl Bogey. She says, I am a grandmother of a very sweet 5-year-old boy who is autistic and unable to express himself in words. I have been taking care of him while his mom and dad are at work since he was an infant. He means the world to me, and I am horrified to hear of children like my grandson who have been abused by their teacher. To a child who is autistic and without a voice, this is very traumatizing, and they cannot tell their parents if there was abuse done to them at school. I am advocating for cameras in the classroom so there is accountability and transparency. Also, I believe teachers who are working with autistic children and those without a voice need to go through special training when working with these children. Thank you. This is from Sybil Patry. Hi, my name is Sybil Patry. I am a mother of 2 children, 3 and 5 years old, one of whom attends Increase Miller Elementary School. I am new here. Our family is diverse. We are people of color. We have had to make some interesting choices, including leaving a more highly ranked and more diverse school system. I know that as someone from a marginalized community that we will face hurdles, microaggressions, racism, and difficult conversations, and we will have to advocate for ourselves and our kids anywhere we go. I am a fierce advocate of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And with this type of work, you need to focus on the most underserved and most marginalized communities first. Typically, this includes LGBT+, people of color, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and of course, those with disabilities and special needs. Today, I am writing in support of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group, a group that also has to advocate on behalf of themselves. I believe in this mission statement and goals of this group and think it would be really harmful, not just to these students and parents, but to the entire community if this group is not addressed directly. Marginalized voices are the ones that need to be centered. They are the ones to listen to and understand. If they continue to be silenced, we are all silenced. True inclusion and belonging take a very long time to accomplish. We need to get the baseline needs of physical safety and security before we can even begin to talk about psychological safety, acceptance, and inclusion. Let's all work together on this. Thank you. And last but certainly not least is Alexa Ferreira. Good evening. My name is Alexa Ferreira, and I'm the mother of 2 children at JJMS. I'm writing tonight because I'm a member of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group. I would like to ask the board to use the events that have occasioned our advocacy as an opportunity to learn and to make changes to KLSD policy. I would like to share a few thoughts. Lately, I have been thinking about us as a traumatized community. The thing about trauma is that it is made of waves. The waves flow out from the center. First, there is the victim, then there is the victim's family, then the witnesses' families, and then there is the greater community. Waves of harm wash over us all, and we shield ourselves in a few recognizable ways. Mainly, we deny, we retreat. We wish to return to our old selves, to be again the person who didn't know such things were possible. And that is a dynamic here, I think. Who wants to believe that what happened to the disabled children at Increase Miller is not just horrible, but also commonplace? The only thing worse than knowing that it happened is knowing that it happens all the times in schools all around us, in schools all over the country. That is almost unbearable to know. It evokes a sort of existential nausea. And yet it is our responsibility to know it. There is a great deal of discussion in the public discourse these days about what is called privilege. And I think one of the most useful observations I have heard is that innocence, in the sense of naivete, is a luxury of privilege. The board has presented its commitment to equity and inclusion, that is, to the deconstruction of privilege. Let's start then by acknowledging that what has happened at KLSD is not an isolated event. It was not one errant monster loose amongst us. The abuse of disabled students is a phenomenon that is endemic to special education, common, and yes, tolerated by institutions and ultimately by communities. Disabled children can be protected. They can be protected if we enact and enforce the right policies. This won't happen if we seek the shelter of our old innocence or if we insist on believing we have excised an aberrant monster. Abuse of the vulnerable is possible because we do not put the structures in place to prevent or minimize it. We prioritize other concerns, employee privacy, for example, in the case of cameras in classrooms, or professional reputations in the case of the policies surrounding the reporting of abuse. We look away. We look away until we absolutely cannot anymore, and then we blame an individual. What is known cannot be unknown. Now you know, as we do, about the abuse of disabled students. I hope you have taken the opportunity to learn that it is indeed endemic to the world of special education, that it is commonplace, that it is the result of protections that could be built into policy being deprioritized in favor of other concerns. That it is the result not merely of the actions of one monster, but of a collective failure to act, and that the waves of hurt subsume us all. As a final observation, trauma shatters communities. The perpetrator passes through our community and leaves us broken and disconnected from each other as we are tonight. But we have something on our side, and that something is our essential mission, the thing that made us a community in the first place, our commitment to learning. And that can be what brings us healing ultimately. It's time we made this a subject of study. It is time to learn about the problem together and together craft policy that will protect disabled students at KLSD and provide a model to other districts. KLSD prides itself on excellence, and this is one more area in which we can excel and in which we can lead. Let's do this together.
Thank you. Matt Golia, on behalf of several others.
Ms. Schiff, I don't mean to be combative, but if we're going to change how the speeches go, can you just let us know in advance? Because believe it or not, in my mind, I actually have a structure and an order for all of these speeches. So
Please feel free to read them in whatever order you wish.
okay, well, you made me read mine first, so that's not how it's really working. But if we're going to change it, just let us know in advance, please. Thank you. Hello, my name is Shoshana Barron. I am the mother of 2 children who attend KES. I am a local clinical psychologist and a member of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group. While I am unable to attend this meeting in person tonight, I am eager to hear an update about what steps the district is taking to address the concerns about special education at KLSD. Parents in our community have attended numerous board meetings to speak about horrific incidents involving students in self-contained classrooms, the larger special education program, and the resulting lack of trust and fear among parents and students. Children have suffered physical, mental, and emotional harm at the hands of KLSD staff. I hope that the board has learned from these tragic events and is working to create policies so that children are safe and protected within our schools. I am aware that you've updated the notification policy for restraints, so the parents must be notified no later than the end of the same day that a restraint is used, but I'm not aware of any other policy changes. Are you working on any policies to address the other abuse situations that have occurred? Can you please share what else you've done or are planning to do? And if policy change cannot happen, shouldn't we be directing our efforts into identifying appropriate placement for students and supporting families in obtaining these placements? I cannot imagine that earnestly evaluating our special education program will be easy or quick, but our community needs transparency about what is done in order to begin building trust. Thank you. Signed, Dr. Shoshana Barron. My name is Fanny Ville. I am a parent of 2 John Jay High School graduates and 1 high school student. For as long as I've been in the district, I have been shocked by bias towards different groups of students. John Jay School is known to be a highly regarded school, which is the main reason why I chose to move into this district. However, it is not a district that is all inclusive, and my family has experienced firsthand the lack of interest from the school administration and a few teachers in assisting my children succeed in their education. To start off, my two youngest daughters both have learning disabilities. My youngest child has ADHD and my middle child has APD. In the interest of time, I will focus on my middle child. My middle child recently graduated from high school. She was diagnosed with APD, auditory processing disorder, in the 3rd grade. This disability affects the way a person processes verbal communication. People with this condition interpret what they hear differently from what is actually being said. I asked for accommodations for her, but the school disregarded my concerns for her needs because she wasn't failing. She would spend 3-4 hours doing homework while in elementary school, homework that took other kids between 30 minutes and an hour to complete. No accommodations were provided. It wasn't until she started failing that they listened. My daughter's needs were neglected all throughout elementary school and most of middle school. The school had no empathy towards my daughter's well-being or her needs. Anytime she did poorly in a class, they put the blame on her instead of taking action on things that could be done to help her be successful in school. It was emotionally draining and a frustrating process. After having all these experiences, I can't imagine what it's like for parents of nonverbal children. Abuse, neglect, and physical restraints, which are some of the things nonverbal children have endured, are not acceptable methods for dealing with children. We can do better. We need a district that is all inclusive, where everyone is equal, where everyone is given an equal opportunity to succeed. I am writing this to support policies that will protect the children in our community, especially nonverbal children who are at a much higher risk. My name is Samantha Zafiro. I am a mother of 4, a special educator, and most importantly, a resident concerned with the safety and well-being of our most vulnerable population, our special needs children. As every trained educator should be aware, students cannot learn unless they feel safe, both physically and emotionally. Psychologists and educators often refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in which at the bottom of a pyramid, the basic, most fundamental needs are built upon toward the top of the pyramid, in which more elusive needs such as self-esteem are obtained. Our school district boasts of its commitment to intellectually stimulating, engaging, and active learning environments for its students. Yet it has failed in securing the most basic needs, safety and security, from which these intellectual goals grow. Many have already spoken to the tragedy of special needs children being physically restrained without parental notification, and even abusive and isolationist tactics implemented by a teacher no longer employed by the district. As a parent and special educator, these incidents are deeply disturbing, but perhaps more so is the district's apparent lack of communication with parents and community members regarding how to change policy and procedure moving forward to prevent these incidents from occurring again. Aside from a change in the time period within which to notify parents of restraints used on their children, what other serious policy changes have been made? I believe the board communicated that they would be hiring consultants with expertise in the fields of autism, neurodiversity, and communication to visit the district this fall and provide feedback. Have these experts been selected and scheduled to visit our schools? If so, how were they selected, and by what methods will they observe, evaluate, and provide feedback on our teachers and support staff? How many special education and regular staff members have received training in supporting autistic students? What are the credentials of those leading the training, and how are the staff supported in the implementation of such training? For example, are they provided with regular opportunities to reflect on their experiences with expert staff regarding supportive teaching, environmental accommodations, and communication strategies? What is the status of obtaining cameras for self-contained classrooms? What are the possible hindrances to securing cameras, i.e., are there budget restrictions or parental permission which could be overcome with additional educational outreach from the school to the greater community? The Katona-Lewisboro School District's reputation for being a welcoming and supportive environment for special needs students is rapidly and rightly deteriorating. As a board, it is your responsibility to take seriously the needs of our students and to provide the community with concrete, measurable evidence of creating a safer, more engaging education for all our children. Months of dismissing or diminishing parental concerns and requests from the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group are eroding our confidence in your commitment to our children. but there is still time to rectify your poor performance in this regard. I look forward to hearing your answers to each of these questions, and I'm happy to communicate further regarding the safety and well-being of our children at any time before the next meeting, at which time I am certain you will provide thoughtful and thorough responses to all of the concerns detailed tonight. Sincerely, Samantha Zafiro, Masters of Education. Just one more from me, from Simone O'Connor. Good evening. My name is Simone. I am the mother of 4 children who all attended KLSD schools from Meadow Pond through John Jay High School. I'm a member of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group because my career has always been about fighting for the voiceless, whether it is for people who are ignorant of their rights, or in this case, children who cannot speak on their own behalf. I am a parent and a concerned resident and taxpayer. I've made it a point to keep up with the district's ongoing special education issues to the best of my ability, and I am shocked, baffled, and disheartened to hear communication between our group and the superintendent and board has ended. Although initially happy to hear that Superintendent Selesnik stated he would work collaboratively with our group, it ended after 2 meetings. Why? Why not work with the parents of the actual children impacted by and desperately needed changes? Why shut the door on that much needed path forward? And to the Board of Education, what exactly is your part in this? Your role is to work with and supervise the superintendent, who reports directly to you. Have you forgotten to advocate for the parents and children of this district? This is personal to me. In my own life, I have fought for 2 family members in different districts. They viewed both boys as throwaway kids, more trouble than they were worth. They were treated terribly. Thankfully, not as bad as what happened in this district, but terribly just the same. I watched as those parents fought and cried for their children, and I got involved and fought with them side by side, and we won. One just became an attorney, and the other supports himself with a great job in another state and is preparing for his wedding. These children, who are sadly voiceless, speak through us, and we will not stop or go away until we are heard, really heard. It is incomprehensible and unacceptable that we are being dismissed. Parents matter, and if you don't understand that, open today's newspaper and see what happened in Virginia this week. No one understands positive praise more than the parents of these children, but watching you praise each other with so much work yet to be done is truly tone deaf. Let's get it done together. Why are you sitting silent as communications between this group, the superintendent, and yourselves has simultaneously ceased? I am left with one final question, and this is a question that keeps me up at night. Why is it that you are all more comfortable behind closed doors? Thank you.
Thank you. Gia Miller.
I only have 2. This is on behalf of Violetta Mardone. Dear school board members, my name is Violetta Mardone, and I am the mother of 4 children who attend 3 of the district schools: Meadow Pond Elementary School, John Jay Middle School, and John Jay High School. My oldest is in 10th grade and has been receiving special education services within the district since he was in 3rd grade. My son's experience has been a good one, and I have spoken highly of KLSD and their Department of Special Education to many people, both within the district and outside of it over the years. I am writing because I have heard about families who have not had a good experience that my family has had, and I am concerned. Parents in our community have attended numerous board meetings to speak out about the nonverbal autistic student at JJMS who was physically restrained more than 30 times over a period of 2 months before his parents were even notified. They've also spoken about several nonverbal and minimally verbal autistic and disabled elementary school students who were choked, pushed into a wall, and locked in bathrooms as punishment by a KLSD special education teacher who retired in early 2020. I am shocked and appalled that these incidents have occurred in our school district. I am a speech pathologist and work at a special education preschool in Westchester County. I work with students who have severe and profound delays and are nonverbal. The majority of our students will start kindergarten back in their home districts. If you had asked me about a year ago if I would say KLSD was a safe place for these children, I would have said absolutely. Today, I am not so sure. I would hope that the board has learned from these tragic events and is working to create policies so that children are safe and protected within our schools. I understand that effective change takes time and does not happen overnight. For some reason, it seems as if the dialogue between concerned parents and the district has come to a halt. Why is that? Transparency and dialogue are essential. We should all be on the same side, the side of our children. I am aware that you've updated the notification policy for restraint so that parents must be notified no later than the end of the same day that restraint is used. The fact that it needed to be updated in the first place shows how much more needs to be done. What else is being done? Are you working on any policies to address the other abuse situations that have occurred? Are you discussing how cameras can be installed in self-contained classrooms? Please share what else you have done or are planning to do. Thank you. I am reading this on behalf of Kat Schreier. She is a South Salem resident with 2 elementary school children in the district and another one coming up in a few years. Dear Superintendent Selesnik and the Board of Education, at the October 21 Board of Education meeting, Mr. Selesnik mentioned Chris Deedy, a professor at Harvard School of Education, and Justin Reek, a professor at MIT's Comparative Media Studies program. He explained that these are top researchers who are imagining how we might innovate school and reimagine education. He wondered aloud how we might bring those innovations to our school district. I agree. We should be innovating our school. And I should know because I am also one of those top professors. I am a leading expert on education, innovation, and technology. I studied with Chris Deedy and I went to that MIT graduate program. Chris Deedy and I even co-authored a paper on learning together. And I can share with you some findings from my 20 years in this field. First, innovation is not just about the technology. It's about human beings. It's about building connections. We need to ensure that all students are able to connect, that they are included, cared for, and supported. This means designing not just for the majority, but designing for the most vulnerable. Innovation means overturning our outdated systems. It means really thinking, first and foremost, about making systems that ensure equity, justice, and inclusion for all students, especially those students who are disabled, have special needs, or who are, I never know how to pronounce this, BIPOC, BIPOC. You may be questioning why we should spend extra time designing for such a so-called small population. But designing for the most vulnerable helps all of us better access learning. All of us benefit when the most vulnerable among us are cared for. Innovation requires valuing different perspectives. If you want to design better learning experiences, it starts with, and this is in bold, really listening. It means listening even when it's hard. And it means listening even if it means you may have to completely reinvent your systems. It means listening to the voices of those who are most marginalized. Finally, innovation requires the understanding that, again in bold, community matters. It means that no members of the community should ever be dismissed, ignored, or devalued. It means realizing that we are a we, and we are here to serve and support each other rather than just ourselves. So yes, we should reimagine education and innovate. But this means cultivating a culture of care, a culture of transparency, and a culture of ethics. We need to value our students, our people, and our community. True innovation emerges from us. With love and care, Dr. Karen Kat Schreier, the author editor of 7 books and over 100 publications on learning, an associate professor and director of the Games and Emerging Media program at Marist College, and she's also a consultant for the World Health Organization.
Thank you. Oksana Aronoff, on behalf of others.
I have 4 letters tonight. The first one is from Victoria Dedbukai. My name is Victoria Dedbukai, and I am a parent of 2 children who attend the Katona-Lewisboro School District. At the last BOE meeting, you heard parents say that the special education department needs transparency and an overhaul. You claimed that you listened to those who confronted you, challenged you, stretched you, and hopefully formed an opinion. You said you needed time for action. Have you hired an independent evaluation of the damaged special education department? Have you given any thought to installing cameras in the classrooms? Have you become more transparent and communicative with parents? I expected you to launch an independent, thorough investigation of the special education program so that you could make meaningful change to properly support these students. I expected you to work collaboratively with this advocacy group. My expectations have been shattered. What progress have you made? When will you share any information about your plans with the community? This is not only disheartening, but dire. Parents still hoping to hear the responses to the questions in this letter and the proposed plan moving forward. Thank you. This letter is from Marissa Beatty, and it opens with the Dignity for All Students Act policy, which I will not read in its entirety, but it essentially states the school district is committed to providing a positive, safe, and supportive learning environment where students are free from bullying, harassment, and discrimination. Hi, my name is Marissa Beatty. I am the mother of 3 children who currently attend KLSD, one at the high school, one at the middle school who has an IEP, and a child at Meadow Pond Elementary. I'm speaking up here tonight because I'm a member of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group, as well as a concerned parent and citizen. I'd like to know why the board isn't representing the community. It's been close to 6 months since members of the community began speaking at board meetings to express their concerns regarding numerous events that resulted in physical, mental, and emotional harm to children. At the hands of KLSD staff. Throughout that time, we have yet to see the board take these parents or their concerns seriously. Instead, the board has appeared combative with the very people they were elected to represent. The board hasn't created an opportunity for a dialogue about these issues between themselves and community members. You've simply spoken at them during your board dialogue, often defending yourselves and the administration for a complete lack of effort and/or transparency. What's worse, at the last 2 board meetings, it appears that all board members and administration agreed not to speak at all during board dialogue. It appears that you find these issues unworthy of your time. During the past 6 months, you failed to put this item on your agenda, and now you're giving your constituents the silent treatment. You ran for office to serve your community and advocate for all students, yet it looks like you're only interested in advocating for and serving yourself, not the community you were elected to represent. Why aren't you representing the concerns of the people who elected you? These children have suffered physical, mental, and emotional harm at the hands of KLSD staff. I hope that the board has learned from these tragic events and is working to create policies so that children are safe and protected within our schools. I am aware that you've updated the notification policy for restraint so that parents must be notified no later than the end of the same day that a restraint has occurred. But I'm not aware of any other policy changes. Are you working on any policies to address the other abuse situations that have occurred? Are you discussing how cameras can be installed in self-contained classrooms since they already exist all over the schools and in the hallways? To date, KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group has been ignored by the Board of Education and the superintendent. When will there be transparency, and when will you share what else you've done or are planning to do? By sitting quietly and not answering is just as terrible as the actual abuse that took place on your grounds by your staff. We all look forward to hearing back from you regarding these safety and policy issues. Thank you for your time. This letter is from Rachel Massa. Hi, my name is Rachel Massa. I'm the mother of 3 sons who attend John Jay Middle School and Cantona Elementary. I'm speaking up tonight because I'm a concerned parent and citizen and a member of and supporter of the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group. And I'd like to know what the board has learned from the recent events involving special education students at KLSD. Parents in our community have attended numerous board meetings to speak about the nonverbal autistic student at JJMS who was physically restrained more than 30 times over a period of 2 months before his parents were even notified. And you've also spoken about several non and minimally verbal autistic and disabled elementary school students who were choked, pushed into a wall, and locked in bathrooms as punishment by a KLSD special education teacher who, quote unquote, retired in early 2020. These stories are horrifying and should never have occurred, but sadly, they did. These children have suffered physical, mental, and emotional harm at the hands of KLSD staff. I hope that the board has learned from these tragic events and is working to create policies so that children are safe and protected within our schools. I'm aware that you've updated the notification policy for restraints, but I'm not aware of any other policy changes. Are you working on any policies to address the other abuse situations? Are you discussing how cameras can be installed in self-contained classrooms? Can you please share what else have you done or are planning to do? I look forward to hearing more from your perspective on the progress moving forward. And the last letter is from Serge Munitz. Good evening. My name is Serge Munitz, and I'm writing this letter for two reasons. One is I want to reaffirm my support for all initiatives put forward by the KLSD Special Education Advocacy Group. I understand from my personal experience how important it is to know what's happening to your nonverbal child in school. More specifically, the two most critical ones, in my opinion, are to drastically reform the policy on use of restraints and installation of cameras in the self-contained classrooms. I understand the opposition may be plenty, including from the teachers union. It may even be a strong one. I also understand that all of you, our esteemed board members, were not appointed to your seats by teachers union, and therefore you should answer to your constituents, not business partners. The second reason is my discontent with the lack of action of any kind from the Board of Education and recently ignoring the issue completely, disregarding the voices of concerned parents and not engaging in any dialogue with the special ed advocacy group. I understand that the board and the superintendent are trying to make small rearrangements to create an illusion of change and some progress. Under no serious scrutiny, anything you have done to date can be considered adequate or remotely impactful. I hold it self-evident that all of you are completely aware of all incidents that happened over the last few years in the school district in self-contained special ed classes and elsewhere. And I do not need to explain to you why those changes are absolutely necessary and inevitable. In conclusion, I want to share with you a saying my father shared with me at one point. We all learn from mistakes. Only wise men learn from someone else's mistakes, and fools learn from their own. Our beloved board members, I appeal to your common sense, your sense of civil duty, and your passion for education to implement the long overdue changes. Be wise. Do not wait for a child to be harmed or even die in one of those quote unquote protective holds to justify the reactive actions. Learn from other people's mistakes. Do not wait to own one. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Abrams.
Mr. Selesnik and the BOE members, my name is Nancy O'Reilly. I have lived in South Salem for over 23 years. My husband and I have raised our 5 children in this town. Having had all of them go through the Katonis-Lewisboro school system, I write this letter as a parent, deeply concerned over the reports of mental and physical abuse that our town's most vulnerable children have suffered at the hands of some of our special education teachers and aides. I read the accounts with disbelief that this can go on unchecked in our schools. And worse, that these types of people are caring for our kids who have no voice until now. So tonight, I would like to know why you folks who have been duly elected by this community have still not fully addressed these issues with the families involved. It has been 6 months, and now the tact seems to be that you're giving everyone the silent treatment. For months, you spoke at people, defending the indefensible, offering excuse after excuse and being combative, and yet the community won't let this go. It must be very frustrating for people clearly used to doing whatever they want. I really want to understand, where is your humanity? How can any of you sit there and defend this behavior? Disgusts me. Your silence makes you complicit in the crime, because make no mistake, what happened to these children was a crime. If this treatment had happened to a child of mine, you would all be facing charges. But because it happened to children who cannot speak for themselves, you get to sit here and treat these poor parents like dirt under your shoes. How dare you sully the position you were elected by these very families by treating them with such disdain? Mr. Selesnik, are you and this board going to stop being cowards and answer the questions of these families? Here are some for you to consider. What is the status of the promised collaboration with the advocacy group? What is the status of getting an outside audit of our special education program? What is the status of your own internal audit, and what are the learnings to date? What types of additional training have been done above and beyond what is done normally? Are all staff who work with the children mandated to attend this training? Is this training done solely through video with no role play or hands-on elements? Who are the experts you spoke about bringing in? How many times have they visited? What were their findings? Aside from the new restraint notification policy, what other policy changes have happened in the wake of this disastrous handling of this criminal behavior? And finally, if everyone is doing their jobs the way they should, why wouldn't cameras be welcome in self-contained classrooms? You have all been woefully inept in the handling of this incredibly important issue. You have treated these parents shamefully, but you should know there is groundswell of support for these families in this community, and we will stand with them for as long as it takes for you to do your jobs and right this wrong. Nancy O'Reilly.
Thank you. I believe that's everybody who signed up, but please, if anybody's waiting to speak or didn't have an opportunity to sign up, you're welcome to let us know. And if not, then I think I'm going to close the public forum. Thank you very much to members of the community. Thank you for your feedback and for your patience. And as has been mentioned in other board meetings, we'll have an opportunity for some dialogue later in the meeting. And at this point, I'm going to move us on to the consent agenda. Okay, so this brings us to 11.01, where to make effective use of meeting time, we have many items together in the consent agenda. With the board's permission, I'm going to suggest that we pull out one item, which is 14.12, and we can vote on that separately in a moment. Are there any other items to be pulled out this evening? If not, then would somebody like to move the consent agenda without that one item? Thank you, Bill. Seconded by Julia. Any discussion or clarifying questions? Okay, if not, then we can vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, terrific, thank you. And would somebody like to move item 14.12, please? Moved by Julia, seconded by Bill. Thank you. Any discussion or comment? If not, then we can vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Thank you, 4-2. And this brings us to 16.01, which is an opportunity for a resolution regarding a generous gift. This is from Jeremy Meswari. It's for a power rack valued in the amount of $500 earmarked for the John Jay High School Fitness Center. Would somebody please move this resolution to accept this generous gift? Thank you, Liz. Seconded by Julia. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. 6-0. And this brings us to 17.01, which is an opportunity for some board dialogue, discussion. And it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to my board colleagues for thoughts or comments, or new topics for that matter.
I do want to address a few things. I am concerned about, the health of our community and how we're speaking to one another and trying to work through problems together. And it does seem that we're in kind of a strange place. And so many of the revelations by the Facebook whistleblower really kind of resonate with me today in that, you get so much more engagement with things that make people angry or, provoke outrage, regardless of, how many of the facts are shared or if anything is factual. And I think that it has made communities across the nation suffer in feeling that the way to come to a collaborative place is not by asking questions and, approaching things in a way that is collaborative and helpful and productive. I do want to say that I do listen to all of the people that come and speak at public forum. I have great empathy for the difficulties, that parents have really across the board. And I know that, it's not easy. Parenting is hard for anyone. But I don't think that we're benefited by the way these conversations or just the meetings have gone. I'm speaking, if you could just give me a minute, please. Okay, I think that we've heard a lot about the board giving you the silent treatment, but there's not much to say when so many things have been said already and then just keep getting repeated. I think that there is a way we can move forward, but we need to calm the rhetoric. We need to stop calling people names or launching personal attacks from that podium and then assuming that we can then all just get together and have a really productive conversation, because
I'm going to make a motion for recess. Excuse me,
Listen,
Bill, excuse me.
I listened
excuse me,
to
Liz.
you,
Liz,
and I expect you to listen to me.
I'm going to call for a recess. I'd like to make a motion for a recess, seconded by Rory. Thank you so much. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
6-0. Thank you very much.
Mr. Machetta, you've said things that are not true tonight about
A number of things that are not true.
It's not true.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I ask for a motion to come back into public session. Kim?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. And seconded by Rory. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. 6-0. Okay, so we're at board dialogue and discussion, and just a reminder that we are engaging in dialogue as a governance team. And Liz, I think you had the floor, and I'm not sure whether you were mid-thought or wish to continue speaking.
I just want to finish my thought. I believe one of the parents tonight said, we cannot dismiss or ignore or devalue anyone in the community. And I do fully agree with that. And I apologize because I did lose my temper because I felt that I was attempting to advocate for civility and was interrupted and it's frustrating. It is frustrating. But I did want to just really reiterate that we are listening and that we do care. And I think that we could get a lot more done and be a lot more productive if we treated each other with respect and the acknowledgement that everybody here that I know personally at these purple tables is somebody who cares deeply about education, about students, about, providing the best education we can. I know that for a fact. And I just, I feel like that needs to be said. And it's important to acknowledge that part too.
Thank you. Other comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, unless I was kept out of the loop, there was no orchestrated effort to remain silent. I think the reason I remained silent last time and the time before that was because the comments we were hearing from the podium were somewhat repetitive, and we felt that we had addressed them to the extent we could in the timing that was available to us. Nobody should construe that as we're not doing anything. We're all very active in trying to figure out What is the right way to address the issue? What were the issues? Are they pervasive issues or not? I think we still need to come to terms as a board with that to some extent. We need to understand exactly what is going on. I personally would like to know a little bit more about the training of staff and whether we have sort of engaged. I understand the concerns related to cameras in the classroom, and perhaps we just need a little bit more insights on that. We've tried to meet with this group one-on-one or even in smaller groups, and in some cases the conversations have gone well, in other cases not so well. I don't think that means that we're not being collaborative. I certainly don't think that we've ended dialogue, and I certainly hope that that's not the case on the part of the administration. I think we need to keep the dialogue going in whatever forum we can find that works. We have made some policy changes. There may or may not, I'm not on the policy committee, but there may or may not be other policy changes that we can implement. And I think that that is something that we do need to look into. I think I just remind everybody that right at the beginning of this dialogue, and Bill tried to express it and got shot down for it, but there are sensitive privacy issues at play here that preclude the board from talking about certain things. There are legal requirements that we must adhere to that prohibit us, frankly, from talking about specific things. And so while people at the podium may speak about whatever they wish, it's quite difficult for us to address in public certain specific items. And I can't say much more about it than that, but that is the reality, and that's the restriction we're working under, and it's not comfortable. I would echo what Liz said. I think we're accused tonight of being criminals, I think, which I take offense to. I think we are all working very, very intently to try to resolve this situation and other situations, such as the SRO issue, which I don't think comes anywhere near the same level, but I know that that's also of concern to the community. And I don't think in my opinion, we will bring in an SRO when we can find somebody who fits the budget that we have available. It's not that complicated, in my opinion. So, if we can get some more open dialogue with the advocacy group, I think that that would be worthwhile. However, I think we should all refrain from name calling, accusations. I don't think anybody knows me personally or knows my opinions personally. I don't think anybody really understands how deeply engaged this entire board is and how caring this entire board is and how much we care for the very most vulnerable students in our community. And it's very difficult to sit here and be told that we don't care when it's clear that we absolutely do care and we are taking steps and actions. Sometimes it's difficult to talk from this side of the podium, but all I can say is rest assured we are. And I think perhaps we need to talk a little bit more about how to communicate that back to not just the advocacy group, but also the community at large.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a difference between disappointment or impatience with us and then calling us, let's see what I got here, elitist, just as bad as any alleged abusers, complicit cowards should resign. That's not going to help. That's just not going to help a situation. I've been called worse. So, personally for me, it's okay. But I just, as a strategy, getting angrier and angrier at us, I don't think that's going to be a strategy. So it's my understanding that there have been meetings. The answer might not always be what everybody wants it to be. The format might not always be what everybody wants it to be. What I have noticed, and I think this would be something for everybody to think about, is much of the discussion and the examples is not their child. It's I heard that, or my kid was here and did fine, but I'm very concerned that I hear about all this terrible stuff. And it just becomes this cycle and cycle and cycle. And, you know, it can get louder and louder, but it doesn't make it the problem any bigger. It just means it's just being repeated over and over and over again. So I think what would be most helpful is people to speak of their personal experience. If they have an experience where they think something untoward is happening, I've heard Andrew say it many times in these meetings and privately and in executive session, that every single time there's any sort of accusation of abuse or something going on inappropriate, it's looked into. It has to be legally, ethically, duty bound, everything, but it has to be my kid, here's what I think happened, or here's what's happening today, right now, or last week, not over and over and over again about things that are impossible for all of us to lay all the facts on the table and discuss them because we're just not allowed to. And it's not appropriate if it's not your kid. So I think some of the frustration is a desire for an answer that's not going to come. I think asking about cameras is perfectly reasonable. I think that's something that could be looked into. I think you could, you know, ask about the training, ask about the evaluation, ask about all that. But, you know, that's different from saying that, you know, that I don't care about kids. We're elitist. It cheapens the argument. It makes it too easy for this to become just personal tit for tat, as opposed to let's actually focus on here are 3 things I'm really worried about. Let's talk about it. And it doesn't get into this righteous rage.
Thank you.
I think tonight was really complicated. I think we heard I heard tonight some statements that were moving and beautiful and compelling. I'm going to ask Kim for copies of some of the comments that we heard tonight to read again, because they were very moving and compelling. We also heard from a parent earlier tonight who spoke about her experience in a previous district where meetings devolved, and she was upset about that. And tonight we had some moments where our own meeting devolved in ways we've seen at other board meetings around the country, and that's upsetting. But it does come from a place of passion, and I understand that for people. As has already been said, we all have a desire for improvement. Getting there is awfully complicated. In some cases, there are some things. Policy changes are relatively easy, which is why we were able to make some policy changes last year. There aren't policies to address every challenge. It's interesting that we heard a number of references to Virginia tonight, where board meetings became used as a political device and their strategy around how that should happen. I don't think that's what's happening here. I hope it's not. And I hope that our meetings can continue to be places that are thoughtful. I know people are frustrated by the setup, and we've spoken about that before. These board meetings are set up for the board to conduct its business in view of the public. And they do naturally frustrate people when people want to get into a dialogue, and we're not able to get into that dialogue in this setting. And we have instead this structure that we're doing now, where we talk to each other after we've heard a lot of comments. I think people understandably, who, as we heard tonight, care very deeply about their children, want answers to very complicated questions. The meetings that I was having with parents recently, which I welcomed and wanted to have those meetings, I ended, and this is a little bit upsetting to me. Also, we hear there among some of the very beautiful and eloquent and moving statements that we heard tonight, I feel some of my own words were distorted at times. That's difficult to hear back. I understand again, the motivation, where it comes from a place of wanting to get what's best for our children. Ultimately, though, we have to find a way to be able to work together. The invitations to this meeting on December 5th are interesting. It's an interesting approach to take. We haven't been given any notice of a meeting on December 5th. We may or may not be able to attend or be at a meeting on December 5th. Feels a little bit like, in fact, it doesn't feel like it was said tonight. Our absence will be noted. So that feels like it's already been set up and determined for how that will play in the public view. And again, that if we want to have collaborative dialogue, that's not feeling like the way towards it. I hope we can work through that somehow, because that is ultimately what we want. I'm excited to have news soon about a consultant who will work with us, who I think will be very, very helpful to us. And I will share that news very soon. And I look forward to sharing that. I found myself in an exchange tonight with an individual who was talking about a phone call that I was a party to with our police. So I feel that I do know what was said in that conversation, that I was one of two parties in. And it's upsetting to hear it misrepresented in view of the public. And still in all, the comments that I will walk away with tonight were the ones that were really beautifully compelling about the need to be a more inclusive community. That's what we strive for all the time. It's not achieved easily in any place. It's not achieved by a checklist of fixes. Our country wants to be a beautiful community of people. And yet, we seem to be moving in the opposite direction at the moment. And I'm not speaking about our community, I'm speaking about our country. As much as I believe everybody wants this to be a more unified, caring, national community, there's no easy fix to that. But we will keep working at it as hard as we can. There's no doubt about that. So I do thank the community members for coming tonight and for talking to us. How we move forward, I don't have an answer tonight. It's complicated, but we will certainly keep thinking about it. And I hope that we will engage with each other in ways that are caring and compassionate and collaborative, all the things that were described tonight about the kind of community that we would want for our children in the schools.
I can say one more thing, just in terms of fostering a dialogue. I think one of the reasons at past more recent meetings I've been hesitant to say anything is that the things I've said before in other meetings are shot right back at me, misinterpreted and just shot right. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to give them yet more ammunition. So I think one of the things is to not make it detrimental for us to speak, to say what we think and what we feel. That it's not going to get twisted and fired right back at us. So I think that will make dialogue very difficult.
Thank you. Yes, Ilana, were you waiting to speak?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to sort of put my thoughts together because it feels pretty charged just after, there are a lot of people sharing a lot of things. There's a lot of emotion in the room. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of anger. And I'm hearing it both from my board colleagues, but also a lot from the community of feeling not heard and not responded to. And I know that that's a very frustrating feeling. And I know that's nobody's intention. And I think we need to do better to make sure that people feel heard and responded to. So a couple points, I don't know if it will all come together coherently, but I'll try. I think this is really a hard conversation to have when we're not in direct dialogue with people who keep coming to us and saying they want to be in direct dialogue. So tonight I heard frustration in the comments, but I didn't take it personally. And I would encourage my colleagues not to take it
personally that it's coming from a place of feeling not heard, and it's coming from multiple attempts to make requests in different ways that are not being responded to. And I don't think, I mean, I'll go back to that point that I think we need to find another way to be in direct dialogue, because this format doesn't work. And the board meeting maybe isn't the place. I mean, I hear the ask for, can there be an agenda item so we can have more discussion? Can there be a forum so we can have more discussion? Can there, and then the parents are proposing, or this advocacy group is holding a forum because we haven't provided a forum for that. So, I don't, I think they're sort of modeling another way to do this. And I know there are some meetings that happen, but I think that I'm a little bit troubled to hear, what I took away from hearing all the comments tonight, and there were numerous comments from many different people, some same, some new, but that what I heard was a ton of expertise in our community on a number of issues. And it is a missed opportunity when we're not harnessing that with everybody that wants to work together. I also heard, or what came to me as I was listening also, is that we're all one community. It is not the community versus the board. It is not the superintendent versus the community. We are all working toward the same thing. And so that has been breached in some way. And I was particularly struck by the comment around how trauma creates separation. And so that experiencing that when there has been a hurt in the community, when there has been something that's wrong, the thing that we need to look to, especially as a learning community, is what can we learn from that? How do we heal from that? And I think we're all on the same page about doing that. We want to do that, but there's not a clear path that has been communicated about the process that we are going to go through to do that. And I have heard suggestions from the community. I've heard some suggestions here, but I think we need to really put out some more affirmative communication around what that's going to be. Because I think this keeps getting brought up because there is some sense, and it is being perceived that this is not being taken seriously enough by the administration and the board, which I know is not true, but that perception exists, and so it is true. So because so I think that's important. And my question is what for us to think about, we don't have to answer right now, but what would allow for useful dialogue? And I think parameters around how we talk to each other, ground rules are always important. And I think, we do a good job in the schools, and, we've done that a little bit at the board. And I think taking a recess is always a good idea to sort of cool temperatures. And I learned that. And there's also something to being able to sit with the fire that's in the room sometimes. And that's okay too, right? So I think both are okay. And that we have some rules for allowing for safe dialogue and how we talk to one another. And maybe that needs to be more, we spend a little time in our meetings again, figuring out what that is, or figuring that out when we start a forum. Because yes, we should all speak respectfully to one another, not only because that's a better way to communicate, but also because that's what we want to model for our students and for how we do things, right? So I think all those things are true. I think, yeah, I mean, I was also struck I was struck by so much expertise in the community, and I agree with you, Andrew, that so many beautiful statements, but I also don't need beautiful statements to hear the emotion and to hear what's going on. And we've heard it from many meetings, and I think we need to map out kind of what our process is as the board and as the superintendent, and, and maybe those are different. Maybe the administration has one approach and maybe the board as a board does something, I don't know. And I do have another question on another topic once we kind of move forward.
Sure. Any other comments or thoughts before we move off public forum? Were you waiting to say something before, Julie? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I also thought perhaps you were waiting for an opportunity.
And I was actually going to talk about something different.
That's fine.
And and again, I think that, I hope that we can find a way to successfully communicate. I think that we have collectively been able to discuss lots of challenging things. And, we've had challenging conversations, we've listened to challenging feedback from the community, and we
work through it. And, I think that I fully appreciate the intensity of the love and caring that people feel for their children. And I respect that. And I think that if we can get to a place where level of trust increases, that would be really helpful. I think that the mistrust has become really problematic, and I'm not fully clear how we got there. And I think that knowing what we're capable of as a district, I think, we'll find our way, and there'll be nights that are challenging and we'll move through them. So tomorrow's another day, and we will continue to move forward in as productive way as possible.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
did want to just, if I could.
Are you going to move to another item?
would.
If I could
Oh,
just say
yeah,
something
sure,
briefly, and
sure,
then I'm happy to move. It sounds like there are at least a couple of other items, but I think in addition to what's been said, I also, I hear fear more so even than the anger. I do hear, some anger. I think, however, that, the anger is sort of directed at us out of a frustration with how we've interacted, how we've communicated, how problems have been solved or not solved. But I think from my perspective, the underlying layer to that, or the precursor to that, is at some level, some fear that some individuals, legitimately have come to experience, and then that perhaps other individuals have started to also feel, even individuals who don't have kids in the schools anymore, which is interesting, in part because certain things are being repeated, certain things that have been addressed and investigated fully, et cetera, parties, informed. But then I think separate from that, we do have some families, and we heard some new things tonight, where I think also fear can be engendered by just less access to our schools, less direct communication or direct involvement in classrooms. And, this is just something kind of tying back to where we are in the pandemic. And I guess a question I have is, do our families understand, and are our families taking advantage of the resources and the steps that can best help every family advocate for their own child and make sure that their own child's needs are being met? Because, to a certain extent, speaking with us is one avenue, but then to a larger extent, in terms of the, some of the families from whom we heard tonight, like their kids are going to wake up and go to school tomorrow. And I'm actually a little bit confused on whether some of these families are having a good experience in our classrooms, or if they're not, are they also in active conversation? We know a couple of people are actively in conversation with their classroom teachers, their administrators, their CSE committees, et cetera. But that is something, I'm wondering is if, because of the pandemic, perhaps, are families feeling somehow less connected to their classroom teachers, less connected to the resources here in our schools who can best support every child's needs? Because we heard from some families who, again, don't have kids in the school at all. And so their fear may be coming from a place of hearing things. And then other families who do have kids in the schools who are talking with us, who may also be experiencing a different level of concern or fear because their access to teachers, resources, classrooms, the school buildings is different than it has been in the past. I just assume that some of the intensity of the emotion that we're hearing tonight is some form of fear. Unclear where exactly all of it's coming from. Some of it I think we can easily map on. And anyway, so I just wanted to share that other perspective. And yes, absolutely, a lot of very articulate and helpful things to reflect on for the future in terms of, our next steps and how we communicate. And I think it is worth stating that, we are all here to represent all of you and your children and the entire community, and that we do not feel disdain or disrespect. But quite to the contrary, we feel an onus of responsibility to get it right for every child every day, every single one of us. And I think, Alana, you were waiting to say something else.
I just wanted to sort of ask a little bit about that, because I heard a little bit of similar comments from Bill too just now about that. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is I'm hearing stories of individuals and frustrations. And I'm also hearing a question about, is this a systemic problem? And so I think that's where we need to provide an answer. And, is there a systemic issue here? Because I think people are sharing personal stories that might relate to a larger thing or not, but that's where that's the question that's being asked. And so I think when we sort of talk about, well, are people working through their own systems? Yeah, I hear a lot of advocacy in here in the room. I'm not concerned that parents are not advocating for their children to get what they need in the classroom. What they're asking is the district, is there something happening? And the questions that are being asked are, if something went wrong, what have we learned from it? And what are we doing different? And we've provided some answers to that, but I think we need to provide more communication around that. And I totally agree that COVID has made things more complicated and has distanced us. But then if that's the case, we need to be more proactive about communicating and do that better.
I agree with that, Marjorie. I think the fear is stemming from the two events that are most widely discussed in these forums. There clearly are other concerns that some people have raised even tonight. I heard one or two new ones. But I think that's where the fear is. And I don't share that fear because maybe I have an inside track, but I think we're not doing the best job we could do to communicate why parents shouldn't be fearful, and what we have done and are doing to address the concerns of not just the advocacy group, but parents in general who have children in, oh, I shouldn't just say that, not just the special education classes, but all students. Because I think that now there's becoming a frenzy, like, oh my God, things are so badly broken. Don't share that opinion. But I think that we have to do a better job.
One other comment, I think I sort of said this, but just with the expertise in the community is, I think there's sometimes a missed opportunity when we don't have ways for parents to plug in more. I mean, I know there's the student, every school has a PTO, we have parent council, which is the representatives of every school, we have these learning cafes. But if parents are asking to be involved in certain discussions, I think I was blown away by how many specialists we had just tonight, and how many speech pathologists we happen to have in the community. How many, people that that think about this, and not only think about it, but they care and they want to help the school. That we all want to work in the same direction. So let's harness that energy and use that. And I heard some specific suggestions, and I look forward to sort of discussing how we could use those or why we might not want to use those specific models. But I think we should discuss that further.
I think we're ready to move on to other topics. Ilana, you want to go first?
Sure. I wanted to, just one of the comments around the quarantine learning plan, I was curious where we are with that from the last board meeting. There was talk about we're going to hire some teachers, what that kind of looks like now. And I was particularly just wanted to also, I don't know if we have, but do we have numbers of like how many students are quarantining on average, for how long, like what is it looking like?
I can speak to that a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
So as you heard tonight, we now have 2 full-time quarantine teachers. The answer on the numbers is that it varies wildly. I mean, I was in one of our elementary schools today talking to a principal. One of the quarantine teachers was able to work as a sub in the building because there are no students on quarantine at the moment. Last week, 63 on a given day. So that's how much can vary. So I can't tell you the average. But now that we have 2 people in place, we think we're in good shape. We think, things can shift as we've learned. But it was a little bit tricky to determine what's the right level of staffing for something that shifts so wildly from one day to the next, one week to the next. But we think this is a good level for now, and we'll monitor it.
We've also, the second person just began this week. So, that's kind of new, but we're splitting up K2 and 3-5, thinking that that will provide more time for students. And then depending on the numbers, we could either, grades together, have individual grade level work, especially for math. I think that's very important, but more contact time during the day. But as Andrew said, it's tricky. It really depends on the numbers and it fluctuates day by day. We're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the opportunity of it's a virtual one-room schoolhouse for us to run days when we have students in that. And then just to clarify that we're not required to provide that, but we are going above and beyond to provide quarantine learning. It's not a current state requirement.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
And that we're still in that difficult space of figuring out how to do this.
Well, I think,
in a different way, we're at a different place when we were sort of ahead of, than last year where we had a fully remote option that people could push into.
we really in response to community feedback from last year and guidance from the state and other places, we wanted to prioritize in-person learning this year for all children. So making that the priority makes it more challenging to provide the remote experience when it happens.
Yeah. And then just the last point, I think you addressed this in a communication over email to everybody, but just that it's not that KLSD sets the quarantine rules, right?
No.
That's set by the state
The
and
county.
the county, and then we follow that. And
Correct.
there is no flexibility within that.
No. Superintendents have advocated for some changes in certain places with things that we're frustrated with, and we don't necessarily get the changes that we might. But we're not the medical experts
Right,
either.
we're leaving it to the health experts to come
Correct.
up with the rules around how we keep everybody safe.
Am I correct in saying that though, if the student is vaccinated, the quarantine rules are less restrictive?
They're significantly different for those students who have been of the
So
age that they
now
could
that
be.
the vaccine is available to 5 to 11-year-olds, the part of the answer to this problem is to get the child vaccinated so that their quarantine needs go way down.
Yeah.
And I think that should be, step one.
That will be helpful. Julia.
So would it be possible at a future meeting just to kind of outline there was very specific bathroom references, and I think that we have some gender neutral bathroom. I just wanted, I don't know all the wing names and numbers, but I would just be curious just to get kind of the administration's perspective on the current availability of gender neutral bathrooms and what would adequately meet the needs of the community in the school, in all the schools. I don't know whether I think we oftentimes focus on the children who are in the high school, but there are transgender children in elementary school as well. So I don't know whether, and I apologize because I probably should know if there's a policy, but I'm not really sure what that is. So just at a future meeting, would it be possible to give us that information? That'd be great.
Thanks for reminding me about that conversation. And I thought that young man was wonderful and very brave to get up and talk that way. Jake, if I remember his name correctly. It did he spoke about a club called the Saga Club.
Yeah.
And it reminded me that we have an Earthrise Club and a Sustainability Club, and we have other clubs that we've talked a bit about before, about how do we engage with those clubs little more tightly to sort of understand what is going on within the student body. And I know we have some avenues to help that, but it's maybe something we want to talk about at some point about there's really good work going on in the schools amongst these clubs. And I really think they're very thoughtful and they're very well led. And it would be good to figure out a way to absorb the good ideas that are coming out of those forums and find a way for us to sort of have a little more dialogue, a little more insight. I really did. I was really happy to hear what Jake had to say.
I think some of that again is like a little pandemic-y related. Like I feel like Saga has always hosted like annually something that's open to the community that the board has been able to attend.
Yeah,
so I
maybe,
think,
maybe.
I was thinking the other day that really, in terms of just thinking about sort of some of the interactions we've been able to have as a community, like I personally have had the benefit of 3.5 years as a school board member and a community member prior to the pandemic. Like you guys got here and 5 months later we were in shutdown. Ilana's been in this quasi.
I don't think you did anything.
No, Ilana's been in like this quasi COVID mode. Catherine came on in 2020 and has, been in COVID mode. So I think I'm hopeful that as the vaccination rates increase, as the numbers continue to come down, that there will be opportunities for us to re-engage in some of those community-based interactions, both with our student community and attending, concerts and events and science fairs and athletic things, and also just some of the normalcy of our, again, we went on our first school tour in almost 2 years, and that's been always something that we've been able to have the opportunity as a board to be in buildings and see what's happening. So, I think that, I hope that there are opportunities for exactly what you're talking about, which exist and have always been a part of our opportunity to know the community and be engaged with them.
Yeah.
And, so
I do think
so I think that will happen,
those
hopefully.
informal contacts are super important and maybe even go further than formal contacts. But I do also think that there are some genuine good ideas that, if you're at the Saga event, you might not pick up on the fact that, hey, we should have gender neutral bathrooms in the high school. So there's some real facts that somehow we should be able to absorb. I don't know what format that might take, but I think. Thanks for that. Can I, just one last thing. So on the reading topic, so we've heard about this for time and time again, and I understand that there's a holy war out there around the two sides of the reading issue. And my understanding is, at a very high level, that while we do subscribe to Teachers College, we also supplement it with foundations and other phonic-based and other types of reading. How are we still stuck in this sort of like, what can we do to express what I believe is to be a very sort of balanced reading program in our school that seems to meet the needs of most children, which I think is our goal. We would love to get every child to their very, very top of their capability, but that probably just isn't realistic in a public school system. I'm not trying to punish anybody. We probably don't do the best for our very best kids, and we probably don't do the best for our kids who struggle. But how can we bring this thing to rest? I mean, and Mary, I'm kind of looking at you, but and maybe we never can. Maybe it truly is a holy war, and we just have to sort of agree. But it feels to me like there's sort of a misunderstanding maybe on both sides, or is there no misunderstanding?
I don't think there's a misunderstanding. I think there are some differences of I don't want to say opinion, because I know that'll be not well received, but there are differences. There are this is an area where we do get measurable feedback on tests that we have mixed opinions about. I've expressed some of that earlier today, and those tests are sometimes held against us, and then we might hold them up in our favor. So talking about the ELA tests in grades 3 through 8, we've heard them referred to. We've heard the percentage of students referred to. When you look at the 700 or so districts in New York State, we fare well relative to the other 700 districts in the state. I don't think anyone can argue that point. And then when we've actually asked, are there districts that fare better than we do, that use very different strategies than we do? We haven't been able to find, and we've invited people to share with us if they know of, we've invited people to share with us if they know of public school districts in New York State. And we receive emails, we're happy to receive emails, who use very different strategies. We would look at those districts and we would visit those districts. The districts, you know, we obviously we know the districts closest to us the best. There are districts that perform a little better than us locally. They use the very similar reading approaches as we do, as do most of the districts in our region. So it's, you know, that's where this is a struggle.
I'm saying that we have measurable metrics and that we
Yeah.
believe that our district performs well based on measurable metrics. I think the approach we're taking is the best approach for all students.
We're always trying to improve it. And you've heard, I mean, Mary has spoken to changes. You heard some of them referenced
sure.
tonight. Some of them were referenced somewhat accurately. Some of them weren't referenced entirely accurately, but we've made adjustments. Sometimes what's happening in the world at the moment is that people who are making adjustments are now being accused of having done it wrong all along, but not being quite willing to admit, as opposed to learning and growing and making adjustments as a result. It's a difficult environment in which that's the approach, but we are always open to making improvements. You don't, well, I think I'll leave it there perhaps.
It's also been my understanding, am I correct, that it's a flexible situation. If a particular student is not learning in one style, venue, system, that others are trying, and that it, you know, it depends. So it's not just one, the square hole, and you're going to try to fit every peg in the same square hole. There's different blended approaches done when
Yeah.
necessary.
So our general education approach, which is the workshop model, and we use Teachers College units of study teach in the reading workshop. One of the things that we value about that is it does allow for differentiation. So, you know, students who are perhaps reading below grade level, at grade level, or above could be accommodated in that model. But separately, we do have this word study piece. And just to clear up confusion, you know, Foundations is our word study program that we're using. We have not officially piloted the Teachers College phonics program. We have not adopted it. Some teachers have it. In some cases, teachers were curious about it. Principals bought a set for the grade level to review, but we have not replaced Foundations. As a matter of fact, we retrained every K1 and 2 teacher back in June with Foundations. And even our new hires who are K1 and 2 primary teachers, they're attending trainings this fall. Even our quarantine teachers we're sending for Foundations training because that's part of what they all have to do. So that has not changed. The extent to which, you know, teachers might look at a new resource, want to learn about it. One of the things I've heard teachers find helpful about it in some cases, those who've tried it out, is that it's helping them to think about ways to kind of transfer what students learn in Foundations beyond Foundations lessons, right? So to more authentic reading and writing experiences. And we also have worked with the Heggerty resources. So those are phonemic awareness, and phonemic awareness is one of those building blocks of early reading and necessary for reading and writing. So we've purchased those resources for all kindergarten and first grade teachers and for our interventionists as well. And so we're using the Heggerty assessments, but we're also using the teaching resources in those grades. And we plan to give all of our kindergartners the Heggerty assessment mid-year to get a baseline. And then from there, it's a lengthier assessment. Use that assessment for any student who, you know, we may feel has difficulty. It's actually been very revealing. We started using it last year for students who, you know, are students that may not always qualify for that additional support, and teachers will say, they're just making it, but there's something that's maybe getting in the way. Maybe they're reading more slowly, or they're very poor spellers and it doesn't make sense, and they're having difficulty reading unfamiliar words. And so it's been helpful to say, oh, there's actually a phonemic awareness weakness there. And it's helped us to uncover that. So, I mean, I think it's important for all of you as board members and for the community to know we're always looking at how to do this better. But I think with regard to students who need an intervention, so Foundations, which is an Orton Gillingham based approach, is our primary word study resource, and that is used in classrooms and as the general ed piece.
Right.
But then the interventions for students who need that kind of support. So we use Wilson and Just Words. They're actually authored by the same person, primarily Barbara Wilson. They have the same approach. So if you're a student who needs that word study longer or more in a more intensive way, you don't have to relearn a different approach and a new set of keywords and things like that. We're continually using the same methodology there. But not all students who struggle with reading struggle for the same reasons.
Right.
So there are different interventions as well.
That's really it's helpful to know that. I think, I am someone who has learned about different approaches to reading just with my kids learning to read, and as somebody I tutored reading in college. But I'm wondering, because I still, again, repeat this, but heard a lot of expertise in the community and people wanting to be in dialogue around this. And so I could bring forward what I've heard, but I think it might be more useful to have some direct dialogue with community members who are interested in talking about this, and and then from there coming up with some solutions, or clarifying, kind of, asking these questions, because that it'd be better. But what?
I think there has been meetings.
I mean, I don't know. I wasn't here, but I heard people asking for meetings tonight. So, the other thing that I wanted to ask about was just, this is a, you don't have to answer now, but just what is when we think about curriculum, we think about who we're designing curriculum for, who we're doing it. Are we aiming for the middle? Are we aiming to make sure it kind of brings all students? How do we take into account different learners? And I mean, I think this is a larger philosophical question, but I'm curious about that. What about the people that are sort of excelling, and how do you design curriculum that meets all those needs, and where are you kind of, maybe you're aiming multiple places, but it's about that.
And so obviously a very complicated question and size fits all, but you've probably heard us speak about universal design for learning as one way to think about it. So in that design, students might have multiple means of expressing their understanding. For example, multiple ways of representing their understanding. It's designing to the edges, they call it, right?
Mhm.
So David Rose, who's one of the founders, I believe, of Universal Design for Learning, he talks about a jagged profile, and no human being, all at one end or the other, and because we all have strengths and weaknesses. So in a classroom, this is why we keep stressing too, knowing our students really well. And we look for approaches that help our teachers to know students really well, and then try to design to those edges, right? So that you can meet the needs of a very proficient reader who also may be a student who struggles with some basic math skills. So, an approach like the workshop model is very helpful in that way in a general sense, but it's also important to provide direct, targeted instruction that, meets the needs of students, whether it's to play on their strengths or to address some weaknesses.
I think when we were at the middle school on Monday, Jeff Swiatowicz spoke about some of the goals of the building, with the first goal to be know the students. And by knowing them and understanding them and knowing their strengths, it allows a classroom teacher to, target and think about what does that student need. And then he talked about, I can't remember the word he used. It wasn't thoughtful, but it was something groupings, but it was purposeful grouping. So in a classroom setting, like in a certain lesson, is it appropriate that this lesson would be taught to everyone at the same time? If you're going to have groupings, thinking about things like, oh, these are some students who often verbally participate. Maybe I should either have them all be together or have them spread one in each of 5 groups. And for teachers to really be purposeful about how they group students to do the work so that there are opportunities for everyone to excel, or, you know, for a teacher to be able to focus on a group that has some weaknesses that need to be addressed. And I think that's, I guess, maybe more pedagogy than it is curriculum, but I think that is part of the thinking around how do we design pedagogy. Would that be pedagogy? I don't know. Like to address the curriculum, you know what I mean? So the curriculum might exist over here, but then thinking about how do we know our students and then purposely group them when we're teaching and working with them and helping them to obtain knowledge so that we're allowing students to have opportunities to really do their best work. And I thought that was very interesting. That those are sort of two of the things they're really trying to think about as a building as they're doing their work.
Any other comments or topics? Okay, then we can look ahead to future meetings. Tomorrow morning, sustainability is meeting at 8:15. Tuesday, actually not until Tuesday, November 16th, Finance Committee is meeting at 7 p.m. The next board meeting is Thursday, November 18th, 7:30 p.m. here in the library. And policy is scheduled to meet Friday the next morning, the 19th at 9 a.m. Did I miss anything? Oh, okay, then I'm actually going to make a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss the employment history of an individual. If I could please have a second. Thank you, Julia. All in favor, please say aye.
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 6-0. Great. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you.